By the way, Jason is in charge. All right.
Shannon, we'll get to go.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everybody. What are we, 9:07 a.m. We can go ahead and get the meeting started. So, Tom, if you could do the roll call, please.
Good morning, everyone. We are now starting the May 29th special meeting. Starting with we will start with roll call, beginning with the employee organization, then management. Shauna Janeway in for Janita Iguela.
Here.
Marlene Fonseca.
Here.
Chad Boggio.
He's on it.
I'm sorry, Jose Barba in for Chad Boggio.
Here.
Esteban Lazaro. Lisa Palombi. Malika Phillips. Tony Royster.
Here.
Matthew Rudnick. Paul Gerard in for Matthew Zeibel.
Present.
Petty Santos.
Here.
We have quorum.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any public comments?
For attendees on the phone, please please press 9 on your phone to be placed in line for the speaker queue. For the attendees in the room, please bring your speaker card to the front desk.
You can start with that.
We have one speaker card. Yes, please.
Good morning. My name is Kristen Nelms, and I'm here speaking on behalf of Anthem Blue Cross. We have been a partner with the city since 2017. During our partnership, we have worked to support the various needs of the city. Consistent with that effort, we responded to the LA Well RFP by submitting a proposal for all aspects of current service: the non-integrated full HMO, the non-integrated narrow HMO, the non-integrated regional network HMO known as Vivity, and your PPO plan. In addition to providing a proposal for the status quo plans and benefits, Anthem also quoted on multiple benefit plan alternatives for consideration and several different funding options. Our proposal reflects a package of service delivery options designed to meet the city's needs, high quality and minimal cost increases that include firm rates with not to exceed rate caps in year 2 and year 3, continuation of Lorena Gomez, who is your on-site full-time concierge, your wellness budgets, and the addition of the funding for the health educator position. Because this is a comprehensive package, we did not include unbundled options. We brought forward the best package to meet the city's needs with firm rates and zero disruption to your members. Moreover, unbundling was not a requirement of the RFP. We respectfully ask that you remember your original objectives in starting this exercise: reduce costs without sacrificing quality and quantity of health plan services for employees. Our proposal, package 3, offers the most competitive financial position than the other proposed packages 1 and 2, and scores the highest for performance guarantees, and again, offers zero disruption. We can do even more if we are given the opportunity to have additional discussions regarding plan design and cost. We ask that you instruct staff to meet with package 3 respondents, since the offering is more financially favorable and offers zero member disruption for your members. Thank you.
Okay, that is all of the speakers that we have for today.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to action item 3, committee report 2525 on the RFP finding.
Morning. Paul Mikowski from Employee Benefits. I'm going to be joined by Keenan and Siegel in starting off this very long report and going through everything what the RFP review committee has found. So I just want to start off by saying this was a gargantuan effort. It was a lot of hours from everybody involved in the RFP committee. in getting down to this final recommendation and all of the pages that we're going to go through. We are resetting the presentation slide deck on the computer. But I can go ahead and get started with this conversation. So we're going to go through this presentation or through this report, starting off with what we asked for, then going into what we saw as general observations and issues, into why what we saw is what we saw. Then we're going to talk about some healthcare trends just generally in the industry of what the consultants are seeing in other sectors and in other clients as well. And then we're going to dive into the actual recommendation itself and what was received. So starting off on page, we want to go through to the original request. We can see our overall objective, which starts on page 5 of the RFP of the report, was to be able to get an address of the rising cost, or a response to be able to better combat the rising cost factors that we've seen repeatedly year after year through our health plans that are offered to the city. We asked for pretty much every option on the book. We looked for multiple different plan options to be able to see what could we do on costs if we change copay, if we change deductible, if we change a little bit of the structure without sacrificing too much, without it being too strong a change that would impact members directly. And then we asked for multiple different plan designs and to have additional plans offered that might be able to be beneficial to the city that we haven't had before. So those are what's listed on page 5. Which we talked about before in this committee. The first 5 plan options are the regular plan options that we've had. So 4 different HMOs and a PPO. We asked for a high deductible health plan offering, and then we asked for an EPO, or an exclusive provider option. If we continue on through to the we can talk about the evaluation process really quick, starting on page 9. The overall scoring methodology that we did for this RFP was a combination of quantitative and qualitative. The qualitative scoring was a questionnaire where we ranked everything by a narrative score between unsatisfactory and excellent. They were awarded a point based off of that score and the total scores available. Those are outlined on page 11. And then the quantitative was an overall band score that each rater would give based off of the information provided by each proposer on their plan, which covered cost, it covered plan design, and it covered disruption. It covered those factors. That is what we're going to be going over after we get down to the ultimate discussion. Through this conversation on page 12 is where you can see who bid what. So we got 4 proposals back total. Kaiser, Anthem, our incumbents, both submitted proposals. We got 2 proposals from providers that are not currently offered to the city, Blue Shield and UHC. Starting on page 12, Kaiser offered the full integrated staff model. They're the only offering for that model. And then for what we call the full network model, we received 3 offerings from Anthem, Blue Shield, and UHC. Through these offerings, on each section, you're going to see the difference of those things that we asked for to make price change different, or to look at potential changes to overall design. So we had a match to current design, which was exactly the same structure as we currently have today. Same copay, same deductible, same everything. Then we had an option 1 design in the majority of these categories, where we looked at changing deductible and the copay just a little bit. So a $5 to $10 change in copay, a small increase in deductible or application deductible were the main focuses of that plan design. So subtle but notable changes. We also asked for participating contracts, which means that we would be able to, through the contract design with the provider, be able to work on understanding their costs and be able to get potentially some money back through the overall providing of services. That meant in current fully insured market, and I'm going to lean to consultants to make sure I'm saying this correctly, fully insured market, when costs are identified in the beginning of the plan year, a premium is set based off of what the expectation is to cover all the expenses. In our current format, since it's not a participating contract, we don't get money back if the actual expense is less than what they anticipated. Through a participating contract, we can work together with that provider and ensure that we understand the overall cost at the end of the year and potentially get some money back if those costs are lower than what was actually anticipated. And then the minimum premium option would be exactly kind of how it says, a very small amount of premium, but we're taking on some more financial risk when it comes to actual expending of cost claims. Somewhat like a self-insured model or a hybrid between a self-insured model and a fully insured model. The ASO option that's listed there is the self-insured model. It is where we are taking on a large portion of the liability and the risk in what final claims are. And then the RX carve-out that's listed there is saying that same thing of taking on the risk with financial claims, but strictly apportioned to the prescription benefit alone. So saying that we were going to be responsible for the financial cost of claims on the prescription benefit and adjudicating all those. So those is what that is what we asked for, where you see the yes mark that is identifying which provider actually bid for that particular product or that version within their overall proposal. We can talk about that more in detail, but I'll go ahead and let you read on the slides or on the screen between 12 and 13 what each provider actually responded to. As you can see from it, it is a hodgepodge. There is a mix match over what was being submitted to by each provider, where some providers offered a lot of options in one area on each plan, but not on the other areas of each plan. Pause for questions real quick. Okay. Yep.
Okay. No worries.
The meeting is still live. It's just a display. We are still through Zoom. That is happening right now. It's just the being able to get it to display correctly on this monitor. We do have paper copies if anyone needs one, since the monitor is not working.
That would be helpful.
Sure. Maybe you have one from the back. So then we talked a little bit in this process of what happened. In the original RFP, the plan design or timeline design, excuse me, we had said that we were going to release the RFP, then we were going to have proposals submitted, and then we would have a preliminary report to the JLMBC. And after that preliminary report to the JLMBC, we would have a BAFO, a best and final cost proposal, where proposers would be able to submit a revised cost structure that would be in the line of competition. At that point, they would be able to see who was competing against products, not necessarily a line item of which product was which product, but see that there was competition and see the ability to be able to come in at a different price point to better compete. Before and after the BAFO process, we did not see the cost advantage that we were looking for. The overall objective of the RFP was to lower costs, stabilize costs over time. In both the initial response and the BAFO response, we did not see that happening in current day for 2026, nor did we see it projected for further years from the original expectation. So we asked bidders, all four of them, why? Why is that happening? Why were we not getting the savings that we were looking for? And we saw three main key responses from bidders in those clarifying questions. So the first category was difficulty in predicting enrollment. We saw responses from bidders that were expecting essentially status quo enrollment. They're expecting the exact population that's in a plan to go over to their plan and have plan replacement. They were not anticipating migration. They were not anticipating that members would have a plan choice, and they were sticking with those numbers solely. What I didn't talk about earlier is that enrollment is a key factor. So part of the issues that we have with rising healthcare costs have been two main, there's a lot of them, but there's been two main factors. It's one that's in the enrollment group or the population group, and then the number of claims or the quantity of health within that group. So the number of sick people versus the number of healthy people, as a crude example, over the population is what drives the overall cost. So this initial response, and I'll pause for if there's any additional points that the consultants want to make. But the initial part for this particular response is that the bidders were reluctant or not able to identify any potential change in enrollment that might affect their overall premium cost.
Most bidders want stability in enrollment to have predictability with the premiums and costs, and they felt like they might not get that given all the moving parts and the different plans that were being proposed. So that was part of our clarifications and soliciting that.
And then the second main category that we saw as an observation was that the plan design options, that option one that we asked for, where we said we're going to change the copay by about $5 or $10 and change deductible just a small percentage. The responses that we saw back was that level of change was not enough for the ongoing cost savings or for immediate cost savings, just to be cost neutral. There would be a much more dramatic change in plan design needed. We got suggestions of changing the copay to $50. We got suggestions of changing the emergency visit copay to $300, $500. We got suggestions of there being a co-insurance option for HMO. That is something that's exclusive to our PPO, where whenever you go to the doctor, you pay a portion of what the overall cost is. And then HMO, you pay nothing. You just pay your copay and everything else is covered. So the suggestion was that there should be a co-insurance option added to the HMO if the city wanted to see savings. That is not anything that this committee has considered. That level of dramatic change has not been something that's committee, and actually our conversations with the committee has been the exact opposite. We don't want to have that level of change. So it wasn't asked request of services. And furthermore, we didn't see, even though we got those responses back through clarification questions, we did not see that anybody suggested that. There was not that level of revision or offering to their proposal that would meet that cost advantage. Anything else? No? And then the last area that we saw as an observation in these responses is probably the most difficult and the most apparent is the overall cost of claims. So the bidders said in their responses repeatedly that they expect, for better perspective, through this process, we give bidders anonymous data. We give them data on where our members are living, what region they're at, what doctors they're seeing, and we also give them claims data, anonymous claims data that shows kind of how the plan has been operating under what conditions. And so in that claims data or experience data, the bidders came back pretty unanimously to say they expect that same level of claim use to continue or even increase over the next couple of years. And so that's why, or those factors altogether, is the reasons that we saw, the main key reasons why we were not seeing the savings that we were looking for or the outcome that we were expecting. One more point to go through, and then we're going to go over to the plan by plan kind of comparison and go through attachment A. We also saw kind of a challenge with overall proposal terms. So the RFP did ask for bidders to give everything to us. We asked for them to salute. We asked for them to provide as many options as possible that they considered through the RFP. We also asked them to consider providing, not consider, but we asked them to provide both bundled and unbundled quotes for everything. We wanted to be able to have everything on the table for the city to consider in managing this objective. That was repeatedly asked for through the RFP process. We identified that unbundled and bundled was required through our pre-proposal conference, through clarification questions, repeatedly through this option. What we saw, though, was that Anthem was not willing to provide an unbundled quote. They were only willing to provide a bundled quote. We asked clarification questions repeatedly towards them, saying, is there an opportunity or is there a way through the clarification questions that there could be an unbundled option, or could there be a way that Anthem would be willing to work with a third provider, and repeatedly got no as an answer. So that played in big towards the outcome that we have of this overall RFP. We're going to talk a lot when we get down to the recommendation as to why the three-carrier model is the preferred option and why we think it's best with everything that's all provided. But I think it's probably easiest to understand that by talking first about what was proposed. So we're going to switch over to attachment A and go through the slide deck of what these proposals look like. Go ahead.
I don't want to ask a stupid question, but here it goes. I don't know if this will come up in the rest of your presentation, but could you explain why it is so critical that a proposal is unbundled versus bundled?
I can answer that right now. So we asked for both to be able to have the full advantage of the city to look at all those options available and then make a final determination. The difference between unbundled and bundled is the concept on the bundle side of potentially getting a cost savings because a provider is providing more than one option. So bundling plans together should be able to have, in theory, a lower cost point than doing them a la carte. The unbundled is the a la carte. It would allow us to say we want to select this plan and this plan only out of the plan options that are being offered. And that way we could mix and match the plans based off of all the criteria that we see and make it available. In theory, unbundled will be a higher price because it is an a la carte offering. We'll talk about cost at the aggregate level, but we're not going to get into the detail of what the per plan cost is in this presentation, because we did say before, we still think there is still negotiation that can happen on cost. So the overall projection plan of this would be to make a recommendation, then for us to negotiate with the selected providers on final costs and final services and everything else that we're going to talk about as key factors towards this concept. And then we'll come back to the JLMBC at the next meeting, not next week, but is not likely, but at a special meeting with that result, with what the final cost is, what the final outcome of all the negotiations are, and the steps that we would move forward to understand that. And so at that point, you'll be able to see the difference. We can put everything out there of unbundled versus bundled and what happened in that price point. This is a large amount of money that we're talking about, which we'll get to in the slide deck. So it is not to be, we considered this with a very heavy thought. Because it is such a large amount of money, it is something that we wanted to make sure we're covering every avenue on, especially given the city's current circumstances. So, oh, yes, another question.
So is the reason why all of the Anthem responses redacted from the report because they would not do an unbundled?
That was separate. So in our RFP, we actually had said in the very beginning of this, we had said, we would disqualify a bidder if they refuse to provide information that would affect our ability to talk about cost. We also said we would potentially disqualify a bidder if they refuse to provide information sufficiently as an answer. We didn't do that. We opted not to disqualify bidders that took that. But the reason why you're seeing redacted in there is because they had identified those particular factors as being something they don't want to disclose publicly.
And some of the redactions that they put forth are quote unquote proprietary and confidential things that most carriers would consider, their trade secrets relative to underwriting methodology and what have you. And so in deference to the request and as part of the RFP for those redactions, we did provide that as part of this deck. There was a lot more that was not redacted, and that we did have enough to kind of take a look at that as a review committee. They got to see those terms and conditions, and that was part of their decision-making process. But for this public meeting, want to be sensitive to that.
The requested redactions did not influence the scoring at all.
Right.
I'm sorry I got here late, Jose. I'll be voting. Thanks for being on time.
I'm sorry, sorry. I have to intervene. Your alternate is here sitting in your stead.
That's fine.
So I apologize. If
I
you'd like to
appreciate it.
replace your alternate,
You can
do so,
switch.
but-
No, I'm not gonna do that.
Okay.
Here. Okay.
All right. Good morning, esteemed members of the JLMBC. My name is Megan Gardner. I'm with Keenan Associates, and I'm joined by my colleague Lillian Turner from our Benefits Underwriting Actuary Division, as well as Steve Murphy from Siegel. We assisted the RFP review committee with analysis and evaluation of the proposals. And as Paul mentioned, it was a lot. There was a lot of blood, sweat, tears, discussion that happened by the committee as part of this process. And we are attempting to distill this down to bite-sized pieces that kind of give you a summary and help you with your decision-making process with respect to the packages today. So we've prepared a summarized deck that we're going to go through. There is some information in the deck on slide 2, 3, and 4 that are relative to the current program, the demographics for the enrollment that are in the city's LA Well program. which has been shown before. So I'm not going to go into that in its entirety. There's also a slide in there regarding subsidies and how those look in current day state. That is something that is driven by your MOU. And then we have an overview of the background of the RFP. I did just want to pause on slide 6 and just mention that the city has been very thoughtful about this process. And in fact, they did undertake an RFI, which the JLMBC did review as part of the process. Prior to the RFP, the outcomes of that RFI did establish a set of priorities and objectives, which were used as part of the development of the RFP. The groundwork, if you will. There was a lot of activity, engagement surveys and focus groups with employees as part of that process, because the city really wanted to understand how folks were consuming their medical, what was attractive to them about the plans, as well as, if they would be willing to see change in their program. So all that was taken into account as part of the RFP process as it was developed. Flash forward to present day, we did release an RFP in January. There were a number of components and milestones that were part of the RFP process, as Paul has mentioned. There was a mandatory pre-proposal conference hearing that outlined the desires, the options, and the terms as part of proposing in tandem with the RFP, and the timeline for when proposals were due. Best and final, and our anticipated timeline for making decisions. All of that to give bidders line of sight into what they needed to do and when to be part of the process. As part of this, Paul mentioned data and plan experience were provided to the bidders so that they could make the best possible bids on behalf of the city. We gave an initial data dump and then an updated data dump as well, where we saw that our plan experience did improve slightly. It was not significant, but it was a good look in the right direction. And I think we talked about this. We did see in the best and final a nod to that from some of the carriers. The overall objectives, though, were to stabilize and improve medical costs, identify cost drivers and innovations to kind of manage those, and then through that look at options that the city could entertain with respect to the program that may help them achieve those objectives. So for the first time in a long time, we were looking at some very deep and different options, such as an EPO, high deductible health plan, and what have you. And we're going to go into all of what that looks like right now. The vendors that were part of the process, the city's RAMP LA system did notify a number of vendors, quite a large number of vendors who were registered based on their NAICS code. But we also did notify an outreach to certain vendors that are typical and part of the process here in the industry. We did receive proposals from Anthem, Field, Kaiser, and UHC. Those are the proposals that we are gonna talk about today. We have some information on slides 11 and 12 about bidder profiles. Anthem and Kaiser are your incumbents. Blue Shield and UHC are also credible carriers out in the industry that some of you may be familiar with, not only here, but at other agencies that you work with or have worked at. But we view them as very credible carriers as part of the process, all met the minimum qualifications to be considered. In terms of financial strength, we did also ask them to provide us with their credit bureau ratings. We did get those back. We did not see anything that was overly concerning. Everything looked good in terms of their credit scores. So that was also a good nod to the credibility of the bidders and the proposals that we received. We also, as part of the RFP, had some prerequisites, we called them. These are terms and conditions that we felt were desired, that were either non-negotiable or that were preferred in nature. And overall, all four bidders did provide a credible response. They, in large part, were able to meet those prerequisites. There were some that required some clarification. We did seek those clarifications, and we got those. Those clarifications do not change how their proposal came in, but just added to the RFP committee's ability to understand what was proposed in their language. So no concerns there.
Are the clarifications included in the favorable prerequisites, or are they separate?
At this, they're separate because we did need to clarify them. Again, we couldn't change the language that they put in there.
Okay, so each column is for.
Yes, yes. In terms of scoring, overall, we took all of this information into account as well as a lot of the different, there was 169 questions in the questionnaire itself. And a lot of tabs, multiple tabs in the workbook that the RFP committee had to go through. And we distilled that down into qualitative and quantitative scores and came up with a ranking. The evaluation committee, formal official ranking and consultants ranking and scoring was for context and technical consultation. And these are shown here on the slide that is up on the screen. There was a possible max possible points of 2,000 across both qualitative and quantitative. And that did get averaged into a final score for ranking. In terms of the evaluation committee, the ranking shook out where rank number 1 was UHC, second was Anthem, third was Kaiser, and fourth was Blue Shield. Consultants had essentially the same with one small deviation. Rank number 1 was UHC, second was Kaiser, third was Anthem, fourth was Blue Shield. And this all is rolled up and based on our analysis and recommended package options in order. So to kind of go through those, the recommendation that was preferred for the RFP evaluation committee was a 3-carrier model. There are a number of reasons for this, and we're going to go through those here in a minute, but the 3-carrier model would be comprised of Kaiser, Blue Shield, UHC. With varying recommended plans being awarded based on the carrier. So obviously Kaiser is the only integrated proposal on the table. They would maintain the plan that they have in place. The package recommendation for Blue Shield would be to adopt the trio HMO, the traditional PPO, and add a high deductible health plan. And we're going to go over the high deductible health plan here in just shortly and talk about that a little bit. And then the 3rd carrier would be United Healthcare with their Harmony and Signature Value HMO plans. I do want to pause and just say that I think the committee was very thoughtful in these recommendations. One of the things that is very attractive about the makeup and the plans that are awarded in package 1 for a 3-carrier model is the advent of the Blue Shield Trio plan, which happens to be an accountable care organization or an ACO model. It provides good access, but it still is driven towards patient-centered outcomes. So an ACO model is a model where the carrier, hospitals, and providers have a narrow network that have deeper discounts that are focused and shared in responsibility towards ensuring quality care. That inherently speaks to what the city is doing in terms of wellness and where they'd like to take their wellness program in terms of innovation. So there was some thought around the trio HMO being a good fit for those long-term reasons. In terms of the traditional PPO plan, the Blues network is the most closest match to a replacement for the Anthem's Blues network on a PPO basis. Not exact, but the closest. And so giving a nod to them in terms of disruption and minimizing that was something that the committee wanted to do. The committee also had lots of discussion regarding the high deductible health plan and keeping PPO carrier the same for continuity purposes. And that is why we looked at adding the high deductible health plan and awarding that to the Blue Shield program carrier. In terms of United Healthcare, their Harmony also speaks to their Harmony HMO plan, also speaks to those wellness initiatives and is positioned to help the city similar to the Trio HMO plan. And the Signature Value also provides a broad full network. So again, both of those together provide access points. And we're going to talk about migration and disruption here shortly. But in total, all 3 of those carriers we felt provided the best possible outcome in terms of access and minimizing disruption. I will also pause and say that the three carrier model is something that we view as a good long-term strategy in terms of competition. In kind of allowing the carriers to compete amongst themselves, not only in terms of price, but in terms of quality of care and service level for your members. So we really did take a 10,000-foot approach here, understanding that, you know, some of the funding models that were solicited as part of the RFP, such as self-insurance, minimum premium, they require a financial commitment that right now is simply not feasible for the city. So this is a good step towards employing a strategy that could help the city kind of stabilize the costs long-term as a long-term strategy and get the city towards those objectives that they're looking to achieve. You have anything to add, Steve?
I would say a three-carrier model is also not unique. LA County uses multiple carriers to deliver service to different subgroups of the population. We see counties throughout the state and other municipalities also use a three-carrier model. So it is not unusual, and you do have the size to make that effective.
In terms of recommendation number 2, the second option that was there, the committee did consider, you know, Kaiser and UHC as a good fit for recommendation number 2. In terms of partnership, the favorable terms that UHC had on the table, the ability to partner in some of the other terms and conditions with respect to underwriting and methodology, just made the most sense for the RFP committee to consider as the second option. Kaiser obviously being, again, the only integrated proposal that we had, and UHC providing a bundled option, which, as Paul mentioned earlier, bundling provides some level of discount. So that would allow the city to take advantage of that in terms of cost. Recommendation number 3 is your status quo option. It is Kaiser, again, as the integrated model, and Anthem with the same plans that you have in place today, but adding that PPO high deductible health plan, option as well. And we're going to talk a little bit about the aggregate costing here. I think there is recommended option 1, and I'll lean on Jillian here in just a minute to talk about the migration that is part of this. The costs that are shown on slide 17 assume a certain amount of enrollment across various plans. Obviously, the plans have varying degrees of price point, which, you know, we still want to negotiate. So we're kind of having this cloak of secrecy here a little bit with respect to the individual plans. But in aggregate, depending on the migration to each of those plans, we could see a worst case cost scenario versus a best case cost scenario. And Jillian, do you want to touch on the migration a little bit here in the scenarios that are lined out here?
Do you mind if I touch on the disruption as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
So when we are considering replacing one set of plans and networks with another, one of kind of the first questions that tends to come to mind is, you know, is my current in-network provider, will they remain in network under the proposed solution? And that's where we really bring in the disruption analysis, which goes kind of line by line down to each individual provider and says, will they be in network in the like plan that was quoted by the proposed solution? So if you flip to slide 27, there's kind of a really broad summary of what the disruption results were. The long and short of it is that it looks very favorable for both the full HMO products as well as the PPO products, where we're seeing potentially some holes, at least in the plan to plan mapping, is with the Blue Shield option trio HMO, being that it's more of like an ACO model versus a true regional network, as well as the Harmony HMO. So then again, if you flip to, there's a couple slides in the appendix that have kind of like a crosswalk that then break this down further into sort of medical groups across all these different networks. And I think what the disruption analysis doesn't show is where there is access within the other plan offerings that would be on the table. So while we're seeing this sort of lower number for Blue Cross Trio, the majority of the current Vivity providers that would fall out of that network would be accessible under other options within the package being proposed. So because this disruption is a component, we're expecting enrollment to shift within different plans were we to adopt package 1. And that therefore
ties into the cost projections for any of these different scenarios. So if you then, the migration kind of analysis and methodology is shown on slide 29. It looks at the providers in a little bit of a broader setting based on medical group. And it focuses a lot on medical group specifically for those HMO products, since the PCP is the one that's going to be expected to direct care to a network provider for other services. So when we saw the disruption results and began the migration analysis, we had kind of 4 different buckets of responses that we summarized the provider responses into. And the 2 ones that are kind of cut and dry are sort of just yes and no. Like 100% of this medical group will participate in the proposed network, and no, like 0% of this medical group participates. And then we have some sort of in-betweeners where most of the medical group participates, and then most of them don't participate, but there's a couple one-offs in there that would be in network still. So based on that sort of categorization, we developed as a committee assumptions about who would move into different plans based on the responses to that disruption results. And so those are kind of outlined on slide 29 there. And then we sort of took those percentages and looked at what proportion of enrollment would be affected. And that's how we came up with what's on slide 30 here, which is expected movement from either, the regional network that would be replaced by Blue Shield Trio in package 1, or the Harmony network, which would replace the narrow network currently. So those members would be expected to move into a full HMO option in order to access their existing provider that they have today.
Interrupt your thought.
Sure.
And that means if you're going from a narrow network to a full network, then the employee is starting to actually pay. Right?
We're going to talk about that more, but if the ad code rule that says the full network is capped at the cost of the narrow network applies to the situation, which is something to discuss later. And the cost analysis in here does assume that it applies. Then there would be an out-of-pocket cost for people that go to that full network.
Pardon me, before we continue on, just a general reminder, when speaking, I would appreciate it if you could speak louder or closer to the mic so that the attendees who are attending virtually can hear. Thank you.
Okay, I was this is a question now, or you can answer it in your presentation, but when you talked about, for instance, a 50 person would not necessarily, they may or may not have their doctors actually go into the Harmony one, so they would have to go into the full HMO. How easy is that going to be for the person that's actually doing this, that has 30 days to figure out my doctor's not in that one and now I have to go to that one? That's my question, because when you guys talk about disruption, I get it that it's, but I'm thinking of disruption in a whole nother way. The person's got 30 days to figure out how to do this. And I hate to think that they think the doctor's in there, they don't know where exactly to find it. Or so anyway, that just, you don't have to answer it now as long as it comes out the next step.
No, I'll try and take that. So again, I think number one, from a financial perspective, making this migration assumption and integrating into the financials gives you a truer sense of what the cost is. It would be easy to just say, these are the rates. Some people might have to migrate somewhere else, but we're ignoring that. This takes that into account. So we are kind of looking at best case scenario, worst case scenario, trying to get a sense of what is the cost to each of these packages. To answer your question, I think looking at a potential change such as this is introducing perhaps 2 new carriers plus Kaiser does create a lot of opportunity, but it does require education. So there's work ongoing currently to prepare for open enrollment, to figure out how are we going to communicate that? How do we help differentiate, as an example, Harmony's plan versus Trio with Blue Shield? Roughly kind of the same plan design, but giving members the understanding of provider networks, providers that are in there and how that might work. Some might transfer easily. My provider with Vivity is with Trio. In other cases, they're not with either, so I have to pick a new one. So trying to work with those vendor partners over that process to figure out how do we get ahead of that curve? How do we target people and give them an idea? It's like, Some of you may have to change if you're in this situation. And again, use Vivity as an example. We know we can target them just because of the concentration of members with Cedars-Sinai and UCLA. That's a known quantity. But there will be others. But this process also creates opportunity, and that the Vivity network is really concentrated in LA and Orange County and kind of absent in the Inland Empire. Suddenly, we may have options for someone that lives in the Inland Empire that didn't have before. So how do we reach out to them so they realize I have a new option now, or multiple options? So it's kind of very dynamic, but that's kind of been the thought process through this entire process, is that if we're going to introduce new things, how are we going to proactively communicate and educate so we can kind of bring those members to open enrollment prepared and ready to make decisions.
A component of the RFP was the inclusion of a disruption management plan. And a component of that plan was emphasis on education and outreach to help members who might be in the exact scenario that you described get to a place where they can seek care and they're comfortable with the provider that they're getting their care from. Be it the same provider, maybe it's just, I just don't know what to do. I don't know where my provider is, help me find them. And somebody can help them do that, or finding a new provider. So that was a strong component as part of the disruption management plan. And we're going to go over that too.
And I just want to add also, just because it's kind of topical, this is a change that the city has not done in a number of years. It would not be conversation that just starts when we normally put up open enrollment. We would start the education process as soon as possible. We would start it as soon as we've confirmed rates and confirmed our negotiation with the selected vendors, but it would be just the 30-day window would be the election period. We would start educating probably July as soon as possible.
Is most of the work will be the responsibility of the vendor or staff because of what we're going through as a city right now? Because it's critical that you have the staff to communicate to the individuals that it's here, but you have to be there. And a lot of things important now, the environment is now, plus you got medical and this and that. It's critical that you have enough people to communicate together, or at least some timeline, having to extend
my staff, we're talking about the timeline now. We're talking about the communication plan now. But the overall concept that we are looking at is this is a hybrid effort. So it's going to be my staff working on it, but it's also be using our consultants. It's going to be part of the negotiation with the selected bidders on what additional education things that they can provide to the table besides what they've already identified in their proposal packages. And it's also going to be partnership with people at the table right now and making sure that every department, that the general manager of each department is on board with being able to pass on communication and making sure that their employees have access and ability to understand this change, as well as our labor partners to do the same. It's going to be
I would also point out that if I were one of the awarded vendors, I would want to get out in front of that process as soon as possible, because if you think about it, there is potential geographic overlap between Trio and Harmony. How do you want to promote yourself? How do you want to kind of attract people to become aware of what you've got and what will differentiate you versus the other? So people are coming into open enrollment better prepared. So at Paul's point, it doesn't happen just in October. It's going to happen over the course of time. And we would expect all three vendors, if this is the path chosen, to be proactively engaging with members through whatever events you have or scheduling specific events to kind of make this work. Because it's, if we can't bring those members to open enrollment prepared, then it's probably going to be a real bumpy start. So the goal is let's do it right and do it up front.
And I'm quite sure you're probably involved with other agencies that done this before and for our experiences.
It works. Every dynamic is different. There are challenges regardless. So again, I think both city staff, Keenan and Siegel, have worked with the city for almost close to a decade. So we have some insights. It's fine, but we're gonna have to dig deeper than that to figure out what do we need today? What's the population looking for? What's going to resonate? And then how do we kind of set up events that help people actually want to engage early in the process to learn before they have to make those decisions?
We would lean on our carrier partners who have done this as well to help with that process. And that's really where, to Steve's point, having the carriers differentiate themselves. This is the advent of competition that starts even before the contract does, right? They're going to want to do their best to show their value so that they can gain that membership. And that's going to be through the communication process and help education and outreach. Hopefully that helps.
I know we're still negotiating with the race and we have unknown factors, but do we have not already stated, I would like to hear that. What is the percentage of those that need to migrate from the primary from that?
So if you flip to slide 30 in the deck, there's some expectations about what we've modeled. So if we're simply just mapping like regional Vivity to what Blue Shield proposed as their regional, which is Trio, it's not like truly a regional network. It's more like it's an ACO, is sort of a narrow network that has like a wider footprint, not necessarily in those same geographic locations. We would expect approximately 37% to want to migrate to the full network HMO option. And then similarly with the proposed narrow network under United Healthcare, that the Harmony network, we would expect approximately 32% to move into the full network option. I think another thing that's important to consider and kind of expanding on something Steve said earlier is that through this analysis, we also really it was revealed that Trio and Harmony are actually very complementary to one another. A lot of the providers that Trio doesn't have are in Harmony, and a lot that Harmony doesn't have are in Trio. So the membership that would be most affected is those that are using specifically Cedars and UCLA, and that provider is in the full network HMO. So that's really the population that's likely to migrate the most.
Well, 37% unknown as far as the rates. Earlier you said there was no specific savings for 26 or 27. Is that correct?
And that is shown in aggregate on slides. Maybe we could jump to there. And I would recommend we start with option 3, which is the baseline no change option.
Slide 19.
Slide 19.
But basically, the conversation is gonna be about what are we gonna do with the 9,000 people who are Anthem customers right now?
So the conversation on that, so there is going to be a choice that we make on how we map people. And so the most likely option would be to map a member based on their primary care physician. So we would put them into the plan that they would have no change to accessing their service. In some cases, there's no change cost-wise for them at all. In other cases, there is a change potentially cost-wise. At least as of now, still negotiation to happen, that they would need to be aware of and definitely consider as part of the education piece. There is a very small.
How much of a change? Are we talking slight change, large increase?
So what we're seeing, and it's I think reflected further on in the narrative report, there is a decrease in the current cost plans that people pay out of pocket in the options that we're looking at. There is going to be a slight increase for those that migrate from the Vivity plan over to the full network plan. For the most part, what we've identified, that is the majority of people that are going to be in that situation are going to be people that seek Cedars-Sinai and UCLA under the Vivity model. They would, if they want to continue with that doctor, they would be, and under the HMO option, they would be able to access that through the full network at a cost. Less expensive than the cost that is identified for the full network now. Can't give, and maybe we could quickly point that. Well, let's talk about aggregate costs first, and then we can go to this, the plan increase, decrease options.
That sounds good. Okay, so package 3, we'll start with that, with Paul's suggestion. It's kind of your status quo. It is what it is today. That right now is providing an 8.7% increase in total in aggregate across all plans, Kaiser and Anthem. So that really is our delta. Can we do better than that? Well, we do worse than that. And backing into package 1 and 2, at the bottom of each slide, you can see based on expected migration, where this could land in terms of that percentage. Best case scenario for package option 1 would be 8.7%, right? We'll have that right, gross cost, yes. 8.7%, which matches package option 3, which is our status quo. In a worst case scenario, depending on migration, that could go up to 10.4%. Expected though is somewhere in between at 9.1%. And that's before we've had a chance to do any post-award negotiations and have some discussions surrounding the cost of each plan individually. So
And
that's,
that's informed by the city or the employee, or is it split
that's total premium, the cost that we have here.
to the employee then?
No, the
Employer and
And
employee
share, yeah,
combined.
yeah, combined.
yeah, so yeah, that's total outside of what the employee gets.
We would have liked to have shown it broken out, but we still want to negotiate a little bit. And so again,
You said outside what you, so that's the city's.
That is the total premium,
Inclusive,
Full amount.
inclusive of the employer and the employee portion.
both of them combined.
in terms of package two, again, keeping status quo as our benchmark. At 8.7%, package two provides on a best case scenario, a 9.8% increase, which is above status quo. Worst case would be 10.7, expected again somewhere in between at 10%. Again, all depending upon migration. And that's before we've had a chance to have any post-award negotiations. So that's that's the terms with respect to cost and what we're seeing today. That is just pure cost, pure premium. It does not take into account terms and conditions, underwriting methodologies, performance guarantees, all the other, the value added items that were solicited as far as part of the negotiation. To the point I think that you mentioned earlier, Tony, one of the things that we asked for and we've kind of detailed out later in the deck are things like implementation and communication allowances. How are the carriers going to help the city communicate such a large change? So we are already thinking forward to having to kind of go through that exercise as part of the RFP, just to have their commitment to help and not only financially, but in terms of the education and outreach as well. So there's a number of those things outlined within the deck later on that are kind of non-numerical, but that add value to help make this process wherever we land, hopefully the smoothest possible.
And since we're talking about cost and the questions got raised, let's pivot really quickly. You're going to pivot back to page 37 of the narrative report. So this is recommendation one, and where we tried to outline a little further on what the experience is going to be for the member. And granted, we are going to be, the objective would be to determine how we're going to map members. But there is going to be big opportunities and potential changes based on member choice. And what is most important for the individual in determining what their plan options are. The top table on page 37 is really it's option 3. It is the keep everything the same under Anthem and Kaiser. So there would be a cost increase. So on each of those little tables, the actual premium that you see there is the biweekly rate of current day 2025. Then the employee's cost, what they see on a paycheck, is the next column over, and then the column on the right of each little box is the expected change. So if in the status quo option of not changing anything, there would be a decrease with all the things considered under the current expectation of things in the narrow network family plan, but for the employee's cost, just that employee cost, not looking at the premium. But there would be an increase in all of the numbers for the full network and the PPL network. The next set of charts, the next 5, are the recommended model. So under that recommended model, this is just looking at costs alone, not where members are going to land for mapping or migration. There would be a decrease in the replacement narrow of plan of narrow replacement of that cost. So that $76.17 would go down. The $0 for the regional network family is expected to go up. We can't say how much, but it is expected to go up a nominal amount. And then the full network and PPO costs that you see there are also set to go down. This is before negotiation. We can't disclose too much, but it is a decrease. A decrease that would be notable. We're trying to make it even more notable. So in this concept, and to focus on Vivity, because I think that's the big conversation. We have a lot of historical information in the report of where that plan came from and why it is the plan it is. we would see a number of members go between from that Vivity plan, which has about 3,000 or so, I think, or 2,000 so members, somewhere between those two. We would see a number of those members go to the narrow and the regional networks that are listed on the screen. So there would be a zero cost for sure on the employee to employee plus spouse, employee plus child levels. We would see a percentage of members get mapped over to that full network plan, which would have an out-of-pocket cost, lower than the figures that you see on the slide. But that would be the plan that they would map to. It would be their choice if they wanted to stay in that plan or if they wanted to move over to a different plan option, like the PPO or the HDHP, which would provide access to the same facilities at different price points. So, and then the overall plan is to make the recommendation, negotiate this further, then come back and say, this is exactly where we landed, what this looks like, and for us to talk about how this migration would work, what the mapping would be, what the education plan would be, and making sure everybody understands their choices. If we then any questions so far? Is there anything back on the deck that we should pivot back to?
I did just want to point out in terms of plan design, which also plays a part in this, the alternative options that we looked at did provide some nominal savings, but the committee didn't feel like it was enough of a delta between the current to be impactful in terms of already having to deal with maybe a disruption or changing carrier. So the committee did review and make the determination that keeping the same plan designs that you have in place today would be prudent. I will say that in terms of the responses from Blue Shield and UHC, there were some operational or administrative enhancements as part of the plan that were seen in terms of the actual plan design. So for example, in some service categories where Anthem would process one way, Blue Shield would process another, which would result in a $0 copay for a member. So kind of an intangible enhancement to the plan design based on the way that the carriers process and operate claims. Another example would be prior authorization process, which would result in a lower copay in terms of the plan. So there are a number of non-tangible enhancements in terms of the existing match to current plan design that could be seen with respect to Blue Shield and UHC's proposals. So I did want to point that out. The committee did look at those alternative options and determined probably not viable at this point in time, and definitely didn't want to do the significant swing in co-pays and co-insurance that were suggested as part of clarification. So this actually is an intangible enhancement for the program itself.
Very good.
Before we move on.
Yeah.
So flipping back and forth between slide 17 on the presentation and page 37 on the report, the math isn't mapping for me. I don't understand how the variance can be higher on the slides, but the supposed premium go down.
They can't be compared because it's kind of two different ways of looking at things. Even though I know you naturally want to try to compare them. On slide 17 of the deck that is aggregate overall premium, it doesn't include anything on how the subsidy is applied. And then on page 37 of the deck, that is that is directly related to employee cost, what the employee's current experiences is, what they know, and what is expected to change. So you couldn't, at least I don't think there's a way that you could marry them together for a one-to-one picture. And that was purposeful, right? We want to be able to make sure we have full negotiation ability with these carriers that we're selecting so that we're not impacting our ability to move those dollars.
That answer your question, because I was just going to interject. I don't want to break that train of thought.
Just, and then it comes down to like, then what are we supposed to be using to help us decide?
And that's the education part, right? Like, I think the difficult thing with this overall concept is, one, we're not able to tell you because we don't want to lose the opportunity to negotiate what this final outcome is. But any way that we look at, and we kind of thought about this in the beginning part when we looked at the RFP and looking at disruption. Anytime you look at a carrier plan change, there's going to be a huge education piece that needs to happen. Otherwise, the employee's not going to have a good time. If they don't understand the change, they're not going to be able to accept the change. And in our prior RFPs that we've done before this one, we looked at trying to have zero disruption. We tried to have as minimal disruption as possible. And we've discovered after RFP, that's not possible. There's not a world where we can do a carrier change and they can match the network perfectly. So in any type of situation where we're changing the carrier, there's going to be this concept of change, this concept of disruption. Disruption is really viewed as the ability to be able to see the doctor that you want to see, or continue seeing the current doctor that you want. It's not necessarily viewed as the price point change, because the price point change can happen even without disruption. And that's actually what's being displayed in the first table. Everybody in the PPO, everyone in the full network has a price point change.
Right. Because I'm looking at the aggregate costing packages, and we're seeing that the bottom is 8.7, and that packages 2 and 1 are higher variances. And the object of the RFP was to bring our costs down. So why would we be choosing options 1 and 2 that seem to have higher overall costs than option 3? But not, here's a labor person saying, putting aside the employee experience, but like,
Good for you.
But as of right now, and it's hard with all the numbers. I just want to make sure it's pointed out. The best case scenario on slide 17 of the deck, on package 1, is 508 million. The no change option on slide 19 is 508 million. It's exactly the same figure.
Right, but Lisa, if I can go, I'll try to rephrase the question.
do you need a microphone?
I'll just move out. Oh, thank you. I stay with the status quo, and the variance is 8.7%, and there's no disruption. Tell us what the advantages of the selecting option 1, because there's a gamble there. And the best case scenario is 8.7. I don't want to say too much out loud, but I mean, from a negotiation standpoint, then we would go back to package 1 bidders, and we would say, we've already got 8.7 in the back.
Mm-hmm. So
what's the second part to that? What's the long-term benefit? I think earlier you said there's a long-term benefit to diversifying your portfolio of carriers. So can you speak more to that and convince us that option 1, with the risk of spending more, is worth it?
you want to start? Go ahead.
It's maybe the most tangible example in all this. And again, I appreciate kind of the committee's ability to kind of help us work through the negotiation process, because there's still much at play. So the best example would be the default plan. We talked about this at prior meetings. Default plan is when a newly hired employee is eligible for coverage and takes no action, they're defaulted to the designated plan. In this current scenario, that's Kaiser. Kaiser has been the default plan for decades, and primarily because, number 1, it has a geographic footprint that you can default them easily, put them in, and they have access. Historically, they have been the lowest cost plan. So those two issues combined made that beneficial for both the city and for Kaiser. Over time, Kaiser's numbers have increased to the point that they are no longer the lowest cost option. Unfortunately, Vivity doesn't have the geographic footprint to plug in exactly, because there would be gaps, as an example, Inland Empire. So you can't use that. So Kaiser has continued to kind of maintain that position just for ease of administration and, again, geographic coverage. To make that tangible, I think TELUS Health, who does the benefits administration, they talked about the number of kind of defaults. So in 2024, there were 782 newly eligible employees that took no action. So they were defaulted into the Kaiser plan. That's tangible benefit for Kaiser. I'm not sure if it's a tangible benefit for the city, because it's not the lowest cost price point. And I think the conversation we had at that meeting was members still have the option at the next open enrollment to make a choice or make a decision. We're just saying that once they kind of roll in, people get locked into those choices. The introduction of Blue Shield and United Healthcare. So Blue Shield's Trio plan, United Healthcare's Harmony plan, both have a geographic footprint that covers LA County, Orange County, San Bernardino, and Riverside. So you basically could look at that and say, I have a geographic replacement. There's enough access for someone there. And that designation now has value to UHC, to Blue Shield, and to Kaiser. And we think that is worth having a deeper discussion on, given that we know we're holding multiple options now to designate what that default plan is. That should have some corresponding effect on the overall rates. And that's one of the steps we'd like to take.
That competition now and going forward to help the carriers vie for that position of the lowest cost HMO plan in that region. So we think, like I said, absent having, an alternative funding, underlying funding mechanisms such as self-insurance or minimum premium, where you can have a little more control over how claims run on your plan, having the ability to encourage competition amongst your carriers will provide you with that lower price point, hopefully over time.
Yeah, well, everything is.
It's not immune, a three-carrier model is not immune to economic conditions, market conditions, political implications, and legislative implications. You are still going to see some of the pressures from all of those things, just as you are today. But it hopefully will mitigate and allow the carriers to sharpen their pencils at renewal time, at RFP time, to help offset.
And I think that's talking rates, just specifically the carriers rates. The aspect of competition that we're looking at is also experience. Right now, if a member is upset with how they're being treated or what their experience is in their claims with Anthem, there is no other option for them to seek that same doctor. It is either they stick with that provider and they just live through the experience that they like or don't like, or they go to Kaiser. That is not necessarily the level of competition that is lucrative over time for there to be change on either side, since we're looking at Kaiser and Anthem as essentially being two neighbors that have a strong wall between each other when it comes to membership. Through a three-carrier model, there is the ability for the non-Kaiser members to compete against each other, especially on the experience level, so that they can have more retention and members have more choice. There is a lot of ability, which we talked to, where members can pick between Blue Shield and UHC to be able to see the same provider. And to be able to help that network retain membership and not lose it towards to the Kaiser model in this competition overall. What we didn't talk about in this as well, and we can't, at least to this point, is what the next year cost caps look like and what the projection is for further years. It is not good. It is the numbers that you see for change now were proposed at much higher for next year. So the ability or the objective to have competition, to be able to have this more options on the table, more ability in both the experience of service and actual access, as well as competition for rates, is planned and hoped to be able to help change that trajectory, to not have a humongous potential increase for 2027. It is all still
for 2027 currently, you're anticipating a huge increase.
I'm sorry, the vendors have provided like a top end increased rate cap. Again, you would work to kind of manage that within that. And again, having multiple vendors you're competing with, be it Kaiser, UHC, or Blue Shield, it's a different dynamic. And it's like, okay, if I come in too high, am I going to give up membership if my network of providers is exactly the same as the alternative? If they can move to the same provider for a lower price point, that's the kind of internal dynamic that we anticipate would carry us over multiple years to kind of change that. And again, it's not good, bad, or indifferent, but your Kaiser enrollment is, I think, approximately 60%. So if we kind of stay the path, it's likely that it either stays that way or probably continues to drift towards more Kaiser membership. Again, that's a member choice. I'm okay with it, but it changes the dynamic in terms of negotiations. So, please.
So, I mean, I have the same concerns expressed by Lisa and Paul, but I have some others. So number one, sorry, I'm gonna, these reports, getting them a day before is really difficult to go through 50 pages plus the slide and have to make an important decision. I don't know if that can be, if we can get it ahead of time than the general public, but that would be appreciated. The cost savings, I mean, I'm looking at the math the same way Lisa is. I'm just not seeing the cost savings. And I heard you say that future years wouldn't see the savings. Did you mean immediate or?
So under the current proposals, the future years are anticipate, or at least we've seen them, are higher than what is proposed for this year.
Okay.
So there is, just to clarify as well too, right? With medical is unique. No provider, and compared to other benefits that this committee looks at and that we contract for, medical will never give a cost guarantee for what the next year will be. It's always the renewal process. The only thing we get is a rate cap.
So when you talk about the competition amongst the other two, what is that based on? Have you seen that in other municipalities, or are you just hoping that they start to compete? Because, and maybe I'm completely wrong, but so the folks, let's say from Anthem, maybe migrating, moving into one of the other two carriers, let's just assume that's nothing against Kaiser. I'm just saying that, that may be the case. So what number are currently in Anthem now? Those are gonna be split in half, and when you have high cost claims in either one, isn't that what's gonna drive the cost with lower population, high cost claims?
It can.
Not, I mean, isn't there a point where they can't go any lower?
So, well, go ahead.
Yeah, there is a point in when a plan becomes not credible. For example, right now, your full HMO has about 100 people in it. That's a very small population. One high cost claim can spike that. To mitigate that, what carriers do is they will kind of spread that and underwrite multiple plans together, which is what Anthem does today. That also is done by other carriers. So depending on what the actual enrollment is, determines whether or not it's credible and what will happen with those high cost claims. Higher populations can absorb that, spreads the risk, and it allows them to manage that more appropriately, which is why, again, encouraging competition, we're going to want the carriers to differentiate themselves, get that membership. They're going to be more competitive in terms of cost, especially on the higher tiers where there is an out-of-pocket cost for members. We want to bring that down so that they can gain more membership and hopefully spread that risk and stabilize it. Hopefully that answers your question.
Sort of, I guess. Being that in the overall ratings, Anthem was higher than the other two. Were they, and you said they weren't disqualified. So was it that they weren't willing, according to what I read in the report, that they weren't willing to bundle, and or that they weren't willing to work with a third carrier?
The last is the answer. They were unwilling to work with a third carrier.
We asked repeatedly through clarification questions, and we phrased it in different ways, putting as many different scenarios forward as possible, and even identifying where we thought that there could be an advantage to this concept, and every single answer came back as no.
Because an additional vendor or carrier will be competition with them, right?
Correct.
So,
Well, it cuts the pool, which increases their risk.
Under the assumption that there's no gain, that would be true. And so one thing that we didn't say, which I think is very important, in the setting of rates, there has been and there is continually a line item that proposers provide that say, if their enrollment changes by a certain degree, and they'll want to re-rate. Traditionally, we have said, okay, that's not going to happen until next year, and providers have agreed. That would be the direction that we'd want to go through with this as well. We think we'd be successful. That is a status quo. So the rates that we would identify through this would be based off of this current year. And if exactly that same thing happens, and they don't get the enrollment that they're expecting to, that would be a change for 2027. It wouldn't be a change for 2026. It would be something that we would also further negotiate through renewal on what that change would be and what it would mean, what the mitigation values would be. Again, kind of with the competition leverage with that aspect of being able to see how they can work. It's competition and partnership, quite honestly. There is a need for all these providers to be able to give a level of information, but also accept what works best for one provider versus another.
I'm hearing this and reflecting on the last meeting we had and the topics that we discussed. It's not just a matter of opening up for more vendors. We also have to make changes, JLMBC members, to how we enroll people. Like if we need to cap enrollment automatically for new people who don't change, who don't decide, or we need to force some of this change. Is that correct?
That would be a decision the committee needs to make, but that would be a stronger way to be able to move populations. I think that the topic that we're seeing, right, enrollment does play a big barrier, and we have a massive amount of population stuck in one corner. So there is a ways that we should consider of changing that moving forward.
But if we don't change the rules that we have in place today, we don't change our operating procedures,
then it's unlikely.
adding vendors is not going to necessarily move the needle.
Yes, and because we have 9,000 Anthem members, and what we're looking at is telling them, forget Anthem, we want you to go with Blue Shield, who actually was on the bottom of both our scoring charts, and United, which refuses to give us a full-time person unless we give them all, unless they totally replace Anthem, and which is the other thing that they did. Oh, refuses to be audited. So what are we doing?
Well, there's still negotiation happens, right? There's still things for us to, no matter what the direction is. But the overall concept here, to Paul's question earlier, the committee already did make a change on new hires. That was adopted to move forward. Through this next step, we'll determine where that lower price plan goes and where those new hires land. Are they going to be all pulled up in one plan, or are they going to be spread out? That is going to be based off of where that cost comes from and where the negotiation lands for that lowest cost plan.
And the four potential vendors are aware of that.
They should. Oh, excuse me. They should be. We have, these meetings are public. This conversation's public.
Probably behoove us to permanently inform them of that directive.
Oh, that would definitely be part of the negotiation concept. We would be outlining that.
Motivate them to.
We did also mention it in the RFP as a concept, and the part of the proposal clarification processes ask a little bit of that, but it's definitely something that would be emphasized in post-award negotiation.
So you're asking us to approve, to go back and negotiate your recommendation and come back with what your negotiations of the results are, and see if the committee would totally approve what you negotiated.
So in the next steps, which maybe is not as outlined as perfectly on page 45, the options to move forward is to either make a recommendation right now from this report, or not make a recommendation and ask for an oral presentation from the bidders. That has always been an option for the JLMBC as part of this process. It needs to happen before the selection actually occurs. It is not recommended, but it is still an option that the committee can consider. Through that option, if you wanted to hear from the bidders, they cannot change anything. You cannot ask them to promise to do anything different. It is just explaining why their proposals were what their proposals are. That also is not your only chance to talk to them. We can arrange for a presentation or discussion to happen after selection process is over. And then the third option would be to say that you don't feel comfortable enough with the information involved and you want to see more detail on price. And for us to bring that back for you to see that price. That would remove and complicate our ability to negotiate for price further, but it is still an option that you could consider.
So if you're instructed, if you're instructed to negotiate an option one, how will you communicate the results of your negotiations to the committee?
So we do need to have a final price point together and package together before the plan can be adopted. So we would break and go directly into negotiations with the selected bidders. We would come back to this committee with the final result that would be built in towards the overall plan adoption package. That sounds like it could happen in one meeting if it's simple, but most likely going to happen in two separate meetings. So we would come back with the results of where we landed. And then secondly, come back with the overall plan for adoption.
So basically you would update the key slides in your deck to reflect the results of the negotiation that then would inform us of where we were with all the vendors at that point.
Correct. And honestly, I think it'd be a whole different deck because it's a lot more material to be able to present and describe of where all of this financial part landed and is going to land.
Because then you would fully disclose the financials at that point, or you
Correct.
would still hold them until.
No, we would be able to fully disclose. I don't see a reason why we couldn't. We'll confirm with legal. In the overall process, though, the RFP still does the rules allows us to go in this order. So the order of the packages of recommendation. So if we were unsuccessful in package one on getting towards terms that we thought were meeting the overall aspect that the city's trying to go for, then we would go to negotiation in package two. If we are successful at getting to terms with package one, we bring that back and say, this is where we're at. I don't see there's any reason why we couldn't disclose everything at that time. It is not different from any other time that the city goes into, we still have that language in all of our contracts, in all of our RFP processes. So it's not different from any time that we immediately select and provide information. We always have the ability to cancel and then move to the next successful bidder. So the intent would be that we would, within a few weeks, come back to this committee at a special meeting and give everything. Say, this is where we landed with negotiation. This is the overall price point. These are the recommended paths to hit everything on everything all concerned with service level agreements, education, and the intent of what this communication plan would look like.
Well, there's disconnect for me is what you just said is if you're successful.
Right.
We're only giving you instruction to negotiate. We're not giving you bargaining instructions. We're not giving you parameters to achieve. So how do you measure success?
That's a great question. So it is within the realms of what this committee is viewing as success. Since this committee would be, not this committee, JLMBC, sorry, the RFP review committee would be identifying as successful terms.
Would the negotiations be, it sounds like is it with the current as well?
No, it would be under tier 3. So
If you get to tier 3.
correct. So they have to happen in sequential order under the terms of the RFP. So we would start with recommendation packet number 1, which would be Kaiser, UHC, and Blue Shield. If any one of those aspects was unsuccessful, that we were unable to be able to get a full package together through that, then we would go to package 2, which package 2 has 2 of the people that are in package 1. And so it could be a very sequential order depending on how negotiations go.
Well, I have one last question that we didn't get to back to the report, and it's just when you talked about the bidders could have included a re-rate provision.
Yeah.
That if enrollment changed from their assumed enrollment by 10%, they could re-rate. Is that with the ones you're recommending?
That is with all of them. That is a standard term that happens. Yeah. And just to
It could go up,
no, the re-rate after enrollment. So
it will go down.
it could go either way if they enact it. So the position would be we determine what the overall cost point is going to be for 2026 through negotiation. Then we program that into the system. We start open enrollment. We put our members where we're going to put them for mapping. We have our education plan, and maybe this one particular plan is expecting 1,000 people, but it only gets 500, which is more than 10% change. So at that point, and that's in December, that we know what the enrollment's going to be. At that point, they could say, hey, wait a minute, I want to re-rate. That wouldn't happen immediately. That wouldn't happen at that point. It would most likely would be like a mid-year change. But under that concept, under IRS regs, if there is a significant change like that, then that reopens the ability for people to change. So it would essentially create a new open enrollment where everybody could change that had that cost impact. So it's not favorable. It's not something I think the consultants could say that in those cases they see that happens quite often. So the typical process would be they say, oh, wait a minute, that enrollment didn't match what we were expecting. So for 2027, we're going to look at re-rating at a price structure that is more in line with what enrollment might be looking like.
Excuse me.
Any additional public comment?
No, I'm sorry.
There was something on the news this week about one of the carriers and some allegations of Medicare issues, fraud. Is that a concern of the city?
I would say it's an issue that is involving multiple Medicare Advantage plans, so it is. Anthem's been requested to kind of participate in an investigation, United Healthcare, Cigna. A variety of issues are going on with Medicare Advantage in terms of how they're pricing, charging, billing, et cetera. So I would try to look at those as kind of a separate issue. It's not directly related to the city, but we do recognize that if it's in the press, it should be noted and, taken into account. But they're by far not the only one.
But isn't the issue it can impact them financially,
Yeah, could it?
which at the same time financially, if we're not have the ability to support their businesses, it's gonna put us in a contract where we're using it in court. We said one of the most important things that companies have type of services is financial stability and having the ability to provide services by employees. There's an issue.
Acknowledge it.
Yeah, another question, I think the two objectives we're trying to achieve: one, we're trying to reduce costs. Two, we're trying to limit disruption. That's the top thing, right?
Correct.
And the question, how do we get there?
So if you're instructed to negotiate, you negotiate with for option one, that doesn't prove successful based on the criteria that the review committee sets forth. You default, then you move to option two.
Correct.
And you negotiate there, and if that doesn't prove successful,
Then it's option three, the final option on the
and
table.
there's no negotiation there because it's the default, it's the status quo.
There's still option to negotiate. I think the question would be what level of negotiation would the RFP review committee be able to see, since the recommended package is to continue the exact same existing plan.
I'll save my next comment for this. Curious to your process.
I do need a bit of information. I was not here over a decade ago. But it seems that whatever was decided on the design of having two, both Kaiser and Anthem, brought us through the pandemic, and our members survived pretty fairly. The instruction here on your slide, attachment A, page 9, said that the city is looking to introduce a new product. I understand the competition theory, but again, that is theory. What was the purpose of designing Kaiser and Anthem back then? What was the city's objective? What was the reason? Was it for the long-term payout, which is here being projected that in the long run, we would benefit? We've invested over 8 years with Anthem. We have over a decade with no changes. Have we suffered because of that decision for the long term?
I think that's a hard answer to give because it is so a number of things have happened over that time period, right? So back in 2012, there was an effort from the city to be able to look at cost change for its medical plans. That's where we introduced a new HMO that was a very tumultuous time in that particular aspect, and we had switched over to a different provider, to Blue Shield, and then we had in 2017, or we had switched back over to Anthem, still Anthem and Kaiser as two. Through since then, we didn't go out to RFP again until 2020, I want to say off the top of my head. And we asked for no disruption. We asked for exactly that. And then we went through that process again the year later, asking for the same thing of no disruption. So I think it would be fair to say that I don't believe the city looked at things like that before. From that perspective, that you just kind of outlined in that way. The past experience in health plans with the city has been more looking at ways to keep the status quo, to not introduce something new on that poise of not addressing disruption. Part of the things that happened in 2012 and why we had 4 health plans added there was directly towards disruption. The ADCO language that caps the full network at the narrow network was because we added in a plan so that there would not be disruption. So that's been the status quo look at things for the past over a decade was to not disrupt. But I think what we've experienced in these past 5 years or so is that there is not a cost savings option in looking at not disruption, at least not directly. The potential for this direction could be cost savings over time by being able to have this change. It is still something that we don't have, nor do we have in our regular status quo, keeping the same incumbents, control over what cost is going to look like from year to year.
Now, when you enter into long-term contracts or relationships, you're betting on a cost savings based on longevity, if not loyalty. I mean, it's a partnership. The question I asked was, have we suffered from that decision of keeping a decade design?
I don't know if we could answer that.
Because I understand the want to make changes and
Right.
introduce, but it comes with a cost.
Maybe could the healthcare trends that we didn't even cover yet, maybe get towards a little bit of showing that, or we're only looking at current?
I would say included in your packet is Siegel does an annual trend survey. So we survey carriers across the country, but we clearly focused on kind of carriers that participate in California. 90% of your enrollment is in an HMO. So if we look at the trend rates for those, trend rates for medical is somewhere around anywhere between probably 7 and 9%. Medical or pharmacy is much higher than that because of the introduction of specialty medications, et cetera. So when we combine those two and weighted them, we weighted them 75-25. We're looking at probably 9 to 11% increases. That would kind of be on average. Different plan sponsors may have different experiences. They could be lower than that based on positive experience, plan design changes, or other factors. Some are going to be higher, but it gives us an idea. It's like that's kind of where we're at. The numbers we're looking at from either the incumbents or the proposed kind of changes by introducing new vendor partners, but it's right about that same line. So again, saving costs with healthcare is we're kind of chasing our tails. That's going to be very difficult to do. The goal is, can we maintain and kind of stay within those frameworks? We make plan design changes. Yes, you could have short-term savings. So those options still are within your reach. I'd say maybe not specific to the city, but I would say for other public entities, one of the key challenges they have is I'll use Northern California because it's a little bit more accentuated. They might see 70% enrollment with their Kaiser population, which makes it very difficult for them to offer any other choices. You know, PPO plans or something of that line of work. So it's the idea is trying to strike a balance where it's like, as long as Kaiser continues to provide value, I think that's great. But if it inhibits kind of the ability to offer any other options, a lot of these entities are fearing that the only choice they'll be able to offer is Kaiser only. So they're trying to proactively say, how do I kind of manage this going forward over the longer term to strike a balance where we're getting value from both sides of the equation? I think the hard part is that, as Paul pointed out earlier in the presentation, is that we're in a bit of a rut because it's, I'm okay with the membership I have, you're okay with the membership you have, and we kind of try to manage to that. But members are still being hurt. Best example would be the PPO plan. Again, very low enrollment, but part of that is because of the cost of family coverage and the amount of the subsidy that goes into it. Families can't afford to purchase that if they need it. It's a small population, but again, as an example, members that have students kind of attending school outside the state, that may be their only CWLA option. So it's very unaffordable. So the idea is through this competition, trying to kind of designate people that do particular coverages, whether it's PPO only or HMO only in different networks. We're trying to find solutions that will, to your question, kind of maintain some stability, but give us a different footing so we can provide something that's more affordable. So it's difficult because we're looking at this in aggregate and we have 25,000 people making different decisions. And, you know, we talked about Cedar's new slight disruption. You know, we've taken that into the financials to account for what that really means financially. Had we not done that and just kind of come to you and said, these are the rates. These options would have looked more financially attractive, but I think that would have been kind of unrealistic. So we tried to account for that potential movement to going, let's get this as close as we can, apples to apples. Let's anticipate where we would need to do education to kind of help people move through that process. But ideally, we're trying to manage kind of all those different levers to do that. Partners have been very good to you. They have over the last couple, 8-10 years, no question. But I think we're trying to figure out where are we now, and are we going to get to a point where we're kind of lopsided in terms of where participation goes? And is that what we're left with? So we're trying to kind of figure out a way to create options, competition, I would say checks and balances, because there's some overlap. So it's a little bit like Coke and Pepsi. It's like they're both colas, but one appeals to someone differently than someone else, because that gives us an option. Then that's, if I can get that member back, we're going to see some of that back and forth. But it is, it's done elsewhere, but the results are going to be different based on your geographic circumstances, which have people spread across 4 or 5 counties. So it's very difficult to kind of hone in and say, if I just do this, we'll solve it. It's going to be a lot of issues that we have to deal with. But I think, to your point, you've had very good partners. They've been great. We're just trying to look ahead and see where we can go. And again, I think we've given every prospective bidder the opportunity to say, this is what we're looking at. These are the potentials we see. Can you work with us on that basis? We've gotten responses back. And so we're moving forward and bringing these recommendations to your attention.
I wanted to, well, go ahead. You ask your question first.
So on page 45 with our next steps.
Hmm.
You list 3 bullet points, make recommendations, not make them, blah, blah. Or do those 3 points line up with your option A, B, and C, or do option A, B, and C refer to packages 1, 2, and 3?
No, they line up with A, B, and C. So A would be in, unfortunately, they don't line up in the right order. I messed that up. Make recommendation would be option C. We would have, this is for the June meeting next week. There would be no discussion further. We would be actively negotiating, so we wouldn't be able to bring something back on where that stands. That would be make a recommendation is option C. The second one, which is ask for the detailed pricing, that would be option B, where we come back with a new report with details on price. And you could still have the ability to be able to have oral presentations or ask for them at the June 5th meeting, which is just next week. And then the third bullet point is option A. Next week is where we'd recommend having the oral presentations.
Without pricing.
Without pricing, correct. And then you would reconsider the
oral presentations be from all 4 bidders?
We would have to outline what the presentations look like in this committee. So in wanting to go that route, I would ask the committee to itemize what you want to hear. It would be recommended that it is all 4, that there is some level of equality across the speaking points. But that would be something the committee would define.
Do you think we could anticipate that if Anthem was giving an oral presentation, they could fill in some of the redacted information from the?
I don't think, and I'll have to ask the city attorney if that is possible. But what they can't do is they can't change anything or correct, or all they can do is explain. So I think it would be a question that we can cover probably after the meeting on whether or not they could answer the questions that are currently redacted. I did also want to say, since there's a lot of conversation on cost, and we didn't talk we talked a little bit about the full and narrow our full concept. That 508 million figure is total gross. So it is total premium regardless of who's paying. If in this concept, the final figures coming forward would be at some point at a later meeting. The best case scenario that I'm looking for is bringing a recommendation or bringing a package forward to talk about that application, whether or not the full versus narrow ADCO language would apply or is going to apply to this. And that would be able to be a discussion that we're going to have at that meeting at that time, once you see those rates, and would potentially change what the employee cost aspect is. Does not change that 508 figure, does not change the total cost, but would change the employee's experience if there is, depending on what the outcome of that conversation would be. That is separate from this. The other part, or after the recommendations, all that. The other part to this that we didn't really spend a lot of time on was the high cost claims aspect, the wellness aspect. Through the conversation of the RFP, we asked a lot of questions. There were a lot of questions on chronic care management, on wellness, on improving outcome for members, because that is the driving factor, is our unhealthy population. We did not see out of the box eye-opening responses there, but that would be a key aspect of negotiations moving forward. How do we change that? How do we get better addressment towards that concept so that we're not having the increased number of claims at that cost point continuing on indefinitely, that we can try to curb that figure. We've tried in the past. That was why we built the wellness program back in 2017 and launched in 2019. It needs to grow. That's another conversation separate from this recommendation, but it needs to have change. It needs to be more effective, and it needs to partner with who we are selecting in a more stronger way to drive healthcare trend behavior differences.
Well, we've been talking about competition between the non-Kaiser vendors, and nobody's talking about competing against Kaiser, which is interesting because their pooling number is so high. And the other three vendors' pooling numbers were half of Kaiser's pooling, and yet our high cost claims are in the lower pooling vendor.
Oh, go ahead.
I would say they exist in both. Diabetes is probably your number one cost driver. And again, just to make it tangible. American Diabetes Association says members diagnosed with diabetes have medical claims probably 2.5 times higher than someone without. And again, that's something that's progressive. It's not so, it doesn't come on suddenly. So the idea of how does that member partner with their medical team to do that? Kaiser has responsibility in this as well, because their numbers aren't dramatically different than anyone else's. What we do need is we need your partners to kind of help us get ahead of this curve and kind of run through that. And again, it's not my number, but it's American Diabetes Association, but members earning $80,000 a year or less are 3 times higher to have diabetes. So again, if we're just kind of looking at this population, realizing we have to do a better job, but that job can come from the city and its wellness program, but primarily it has to be led by the carriers, whoever those are, or whether it's Vivity, Trio, or Harmony. Those vendors too have to be engaging and working with those members more directly. And I'll be honest, I think sometimes it's a long time ago, but it's still true. Getting a phone call at night from Anthem, Kaiser, or somebody else, not going to move the needle for me. My physician calls me, I may take action. But more importantly is, when is that contact made? If I have an episode, if I'm released from the emergency room or hospital and the outreach occurs in a timely fashion, I'm more apt to be open to it. If I get past that cycle and saying, I'm okay, I survived it, we're going to lower that plateau, they're getting worse, but they feel like they can move on without that help. And that's what your vendor partners need to do a better job of, is intervening on those key cost drivers like diabetes, hypertension, not the big items, but the items that grow into something else. And that's part of that wellness program that we'd like to get an improvement of emphasis from all partners.
Just in terms of overall costs, in looking at some of the plan utilization, we saw, a large number, like 1.4 million in claims that came through to emergency rooms that could have been served at an urgent care. So there's a lot of work to be done in terms of steerage and getting folks to the appropriate point of care too, that will help in terms of the costs of the plan and how it's running. So there's a lot of work to be done, and having whether it's your existing partners or new partners, there's some groundwork that has to be initiated and laid.
I apologize, but probably a more tangible example would be of all the medical groups that these various carriers partner with and contract with as network providers. They should have some insights into the ones that treat diabetes better than others. Instead of just making a decision on a provider just based on geographic choice, it's closest to me. Convenience is good, but if I have diabetes, but there's a medical group that is far better at treating diabetes than others, I'd like to think that those vendors can help members identify those. Who gets better results? Why should I think about going to them? That's kind of the mindset we're trying to change versus just going, I pick someone close to my house, I'm good. You know, if you have a condition and someone's good at treating it, we should be able to channel them to them or do a better job of promoting their success. So people are interested in going there. And that, again, from a competition standpoint, would one carrier do a better job than the other? And if that draws members to them and they can manage them better, it's a win for everybody.
Part of what makes package option one attractive with the ACO through Blue Shield. That is part of the focus is patient-centered outcomes.
Can you remind me what decision, if any, we made on the full network? Did we decide to cease new enrollment in that?
Well, there has not been a decision made on enrollment caps at all. So when we met last, the only actions that we moved forward were the action on
New enrollment.
new enrollment, thank you, and the dependent verification document available through open enrollment. There was another minor one, but we did not take action on the. Yes,
Right.
so there were two items that we did not take action on, still need further discussion. One was active enrollment action, whether or not there be an active enrollment, and the other one was enrollment limits.
I would suggest reserving judgment on whether to keep the full network open or closed until after negotiations are complete and we have an idea of what do we have and how those options would fill out, because you may want to retain that based on certain choices you choose to make.
So there is a third option, fourth option, excuse me, not necessarily recommended either, but we can, it is always on the table. You don't have to take action now. We could revisit this at the next meeting. That is not recommended just because of timeline. We do want to try to get through to a decision and a final plan menu with rates very quickly so that we can have our 2026 open enrollment period successful and not impacted by the delay in time, but it is still an option.
I know you said the negotiations would be with those under recommendation number 1 first, but does the RFP process prohibit you from negotiating with all the bidders still?
It does need to be sequential. So we do need to go in order. So our ability to be able to go to package 2 or 3 is only under the condition that package 1 was unsuccessful.
Unsuccessful in terms of recommendation accepted by.
No, unsuccessful on being able to get to a final term that the RFP review committee identified as being mutually agreed to and acceptable.
You don't get to get the specific bargaining. The trust that people you afford it. And Mr. Griffin. Hello, if you're watching, Mr. Griffin.
So we need to introduce a motion to have you go and negotiate option 1 and come back to results. And if you're not happy with the results, what happens?
So I look to legal to confirm that I get this correct. So in the event that we would offer a final outcome and say this is the recommended package for this, and we are suggesting an adopted plan menu, and the committee is not happy with that and wants to make a change, I think it's a contract question of whether or not a change is or what that looks like. Is that making sense?
The question, if once the recommendation is put forth before this committee, happy with the different point of view, what the next steps would be. Sure. Well, and then again, I think that's a required further discussion with benefit division, but then we are, you know, if there is no recommendation to be adopted following the RFP,
then benefits in a position, the city's in a position where they would have to theoretically continue with the policy, the program benefits it continues to have in order to provide coverage for the employees, and then have to be RFP.
Let me put it this way,
Theoretically,
For
this is
instance,
just theoretical.
how about you come back with option one and we're not happy with it, we can't, although you recommended, we can't get to option two.
I would say on the surface of how that's proposed, that is both true and not true. So we would, in the regular scheme of how contracts work, we execute a contract and then we can cancel that contract at any time and then move to the next bidder. So in this proposal, we haven't executed a contract yet. We would be coming forth with our final package together. And we would say, this is what the final package looks like. This is what we're going to execute. And then at that point, it would be a question of, and where we'd have to iron out with legal exactly on where the line goes. Would it be a position that we'd say that we still have the ability to go to the next bidder? Or is it a cancel the RFP completely, which is what legal would just identify.
Well, you said that if you don't achieve success in your negotiations in package one, and you would go to package two, when does that happen? I mean, the way I'm envisioning this is, this meeting ends, you get on the phone with option one, all three vendors, and they say, what we submit is what we submit, good luck to you. Okay, well, then that doesn't achieve the objective that, let's say, the review committee has set.
Right.
So you get on the phone with option two, which are, as you noted, two of the same people. They say, well, you know, in the context of only two vendors, not three, we're willing to shave off a point. And then it stops there, because that may, if it achieves the success criteria, then it stops there. If it doesn't, then you go to option three, current vendors, and you say, here we are, and they say, yeah, we'll take a point off, or we'll leave it where it is. You would come back to us with the results of all three of those negotiations.
Yes, but not sequentially. So it would be at the end of whatever the process was. So exactly in that scenario, it would be at the end of three. We would not come back to you before the result of negotiation with three happened. But we would give you.
We're not going to hear from you until the results of all three engagements are completed. That's what I'm trying to get at. If you, let me try it differently. Go forth and negotiate. If you go to option one, they say it is what it is. Are you coming back and telling us that?
We in theory could give a preliminary update of just saying we did not reach terms and we moved on to option two, but without further detail because we were still negotiating.
Okay. I would prefer to go through the process if we instruct you to go to negotiate.
The preferred method would be for us to go through the entire process and come down to a final term, not come back to this committee until we've said this is the result that we got to.
And if you don't achieve success in option one, but you do in option two, you'll come back and you'll tell us that the negotiations in option one were unsuccessful. Negotiations in number two yielded this level.
Correct.
And then, but to Marlene's point, then option three is static at that point. You've not engaged them.
Correct. Absolutely correct. So if we were successful in option one, we have not looked at option two or option three, and we wouldn't continue to negotiate on those because we're not allowed to under the terms of the RFP of how it works. If we were moved down to the example that Paul just gave, we said option one was not successful, and we moved to option two, and we identified it as being successful. We would come back to this committee without going to option three. There is still at that time when we do that, the conversation of what that looks like. The intent would be for us to continue with negotiation, to continue with contract execution, with those preferred or those negotiated terms. The city always reserves the right to cancel the RFP, or to so in the event that you were just completely unhappy with everything, there is that option to consider. It should not be taken lightly, though. We would definitely need to discuss fully why that action was taken. And if that action was taken, it could be impactful to further proposals, procurements in the future. But I think it's what's difficult to understand and difficult to think about. We don't know what the outcome's going to be right now because we don't know what negotiations are going to land. When we do have a final set of figure and set of terms, there are still a lot of other areas to talk about, a lot of other conversations to have on what that looks like. So we could come forward with a price package to you that says this, but we could still potentially have additional changes that we would look at, specifically that full de narrow network conversation, as well as what education and other things might look at for this overall package. So it is not a one and done. It is multiple steps that we still have to take.
And yet the action items on here are asking us to recommend recommendation, package 1.
Correct. So recommendation B is package 1. Recommendation C is acknowledgement of the overall concept of the tiered process. So in the event that, and that's outlined in RFP section 3.1.4, in the event that we are unsuccessful in meeting terms for recommendation number B, then we would go to the second package and the third package sequentially. That is recommendation C.
If we make a recommendation today, is it that order, or are we
Correct.
able to, like, I recommend options 3 or 2?
No, so it has to follow from the procurement process. It would be you are recommending the package in that order, not in a different order, because that is the way that the evaluation committee had identified scores and identified the outcome. So this committee can't change that particular aspect of the scoring.
Purely out of curiosity, who's on the negotiating team for the city?
It is going to be heavily by the consultants as well as our staff.
You participate?
Yes. I don't know if I should have said that, but yes.
And
Does it reach anything? Just curious.
So even if we don't make a recommendation today, on June 5th or June whatever, when we make a recommendation, we have to first decide whether or not we're recommending option 1, or are we? No, you're saying that to with the RFP process that we.
So the RFP scoring is the scoring, it is the outcome, it can't be changed by this committee. So it's either recommending it to go forward or saying, I don't know that there's an option to say you don't recommend or to take no action. For the overall outcome of the recommendation for the RFP.
You're asking what would happen, not at the end, not with respect to these recommendations, but if regarding future recommendations based on the results of what you're recommending today.
I guess I'm trying to figure out whether or not this body is voting on whether they prefer 1, 2, or 3, or if that's out of our hands, because now it's starting to sound like it's out of our hands.
It is. It is because this body, the RFP, the JLMBC committee was not a rater, did not rate on the outcome. The RFP committee is the raters, or are the raters, excuse me. There were 8 different raters that did peer rating to get the outcome that is the outcome. They are making the recommendation. If this JLMBC committee can either concur with that recommendation or not concur with the recommendation, you can't alter it under the process of how the city RFP is set up and how the authority for contracting is. Because this committee, the JLMBC committee, is recommending that the personnel department actually to take the action. It's personnel department that is the authority to contract. It's personnel department that issued the RFP. This is advisory action that the JLMBC is taking.
But we're not gonna know what's going on until we get into negotiations and come back with a place. Because really, like I said, we can't change the RFP process. It is what it is. The only thing the committee can do is accept it or reject it. That's the only choice we have. And the only way we're gonna know the details is to allow you to go back and negotiate and have conversation. And if it works out with one, that's what it does for the two.
After which time we still have the authority to reject.
Right, yeah.
There's no downside in sending it to negotiate.
Which. And how do we do that? How do we send them to negotiate?
They go-
We don't make a recommendation.
No,
you do.
You adopt the recommendation to start negotiations with tier redaction with one and with two, one with three. And then report back to the committee on the results of those negotiations for further judgment. Is that right?
That's not how it reads.
It's, I know it's confusing. So,
The
so the,
negotiation Sounds like we're starting contracts with these three companies. It
and
doesn't say
the
we're
reason that reads,
negotiations, it says to go into contract.
and the reason it reads like that is because that's the way the RFP language reads. So the RFP language outlined our process and ability. It's been the same structure of how we've issued RFPs for a very long time. It's definitely something that I know has been a pet peeve in prior conversations and something we've looked at trying to change, but it is not changed yet. And it is the way that this is set up as well. So that you're making a recommendation to select, and that's the keywords in the RFP language, to select these bidders for pre-award negotiations. And so that is the recommendation language that is listed in item number B, so that we can start that negotiation pending successful negotiations by the personnel department with each vendor, and then come to that final pre-award settlement or a result.
And I'm sorry to keep asking this, but if we do not make a recommendation and ask for additional details on pricing, but you're saying you can't really give us details,
We
at
can,
that point, you would be able to?
so if you wanted to, if you said there's you want to see all the price, you need to see that before you're feeling comfortable with this recommendation. We can do that. It removes our ability to or seriously impacts our ability to negotiate on those aspects. Because once we publish that price, the bidders are not as favorable of changing it.
Well, I probably asked for it, still will do this in closed session, because it's still in the prices and whatever the cost.
No, at this point in time, there is no ground for close.
Also going back to Anthem, what you said was unwillingness to work with a third. I mean, was that hard and like on a fine paper type thing, or just it's done down?
They responded multiple times in writing to the request. Because we were trying to keep all the bidders on the same basis, and it was an outlier. And so we're trying to get a sense of, would you be open to this? And the responses throughout the process has been no.
If we were to recommend, not make a recommendation, we ask for details on the pricing. Will we have more than a day to review the information?
I think so. I think we could. I think we could have that at the June 5th meeting next week, which would be published on the Brown Act this weekend. So that would be the. I'm getting
Negotiated rates?
no. If I'm understanding the question correctly, it is putting everything up front. So
No, the question has to go with item number B. If you said, do not make a recommendation, ask for additional details on pricing. We talked about you bringing the details in regards to pricing for us to review.
right.
Which would hinder your negotiations because it publishes. I'm asking, when will we have those figures prior to us meeting? Because we would need time to review thoroughly.
So next special meeting.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure we could put that together and release that over the weekend for the June 5th meeting next week, the regular meeting.
If I understand the question, you're asking if we go through the negotiation process.
No, not
And pursue-
negotiation.
Saying not negotiation.
So everything we haven't disclosed, he's saying disclose it.
That is option B.
That,
Or
that-
item B.
you're looking on page 46, correct?
I hate to jump in, but I think you're,
Following Marlene,
I think.
but I wanted to know how much time we're gonna have to review the
Yeah,
text.
so if I understand correctly, I think what I'm hearing the question is, if we go through the negotiation process and then come back to the JLMBC with the results and publish them, how much time would you have to review those? Am I understanding that correctly?
Oh, okay. So in that one, so in that one, you are recommending the recommendation as identified in the report. That we go out to negotiations. And then we would be able to make a strong effort to have the materials available beforehand. Multiple days beforehand. The Brown Act it would be a special meeting, to what Steve was saying. It would not be next week. It would be at some point in June that we'd have to schedule a special meeting. It is 24 hours for Brown Act, which is what we did for this one. It was a rush to get this document out, just to be completely blunt. We would make sure there's more timing on that. There is less material in this concept, though. So we've done the groundwork in this big monster of a report. So that end result is less effort once we get to it on creating that deck and having it out. So I think we could be.
I'm glad we worked this out. Thank you for the effort.
Back to page 1 of the report itself. The recommendation could be A through D.
Correct.
Do we have actual numbers on the description? And then gave us percentages of migration and possible. In terms of like membership or we have provider counts in terms of who would be disrupted, but we don't have a specific number for that. The format of the report.
Member versus what?
Provider.
Oh, okay.
Like we have the number of providers,
Okay.
like doctors or facilities, whatever it may be, but we can't tie membership to those specific facilities on the disruption account. There is some crosswalks in the appendix that have some membership counts on there. And we can provide some additional detail there. Also, migration analysis. Be the last, that's the last
45 and
45 and
46.
46. So those are kind of the two key existing networks where we would see more of the membership needing to make a decision about which network they want to move into. And if you follow across the grid, you can see it's sorted by the provider or the medical groups that have the most membership down to the least. It goes down to 5 or so members. And you can see which network they participate in versus which they don't. And based on their response, whether it's the Y, the N, Y2 or N2, indicates if that amount of membership would be disrupted, the likelihood of that. What is the SCR exact? Blue Steel, local access block network. That was an alternative network quoted as a narrow network replacement.
I want to follow up on a question Paul had a long time ago, which was a rephrasing. But I still haven't heard this, I really haven't heard the selling points for option 1 and option 2 in terms of deviating from status quo. Like, really haven't. And I'm wondering if we were to have oral presentations by the 4 bidders, whether or not that would even provide any clarity or would end up illustrating why option 1 and option 2 are better choices than the status quo.
I think if it is desirable for the JLMBC to have oral presentations, I think we could outline areas that the bidders would speak on, but it can only be within what they propose and explaining what they proposed. So we could potentially find something that would speak towards their services that might help understand what that competition enhanced looks like. I think it would be difficult though. I think it would be difficult to express it. Go ahead.
Could they discuss their potential plans for implementation during those presentations?
That is part of the RFP response.
Because I think the
Limited to the RFP itself, the responses which they get. The bidders were all, just so you know, the bidders were all given an opportunity to clarify their responses to the proposals based on questions that the rating committee issued to them. The committee unfortunately can't step in and be a super rating committee to reevaluate the ratings that was already performed by the department in the ratings group. So the questioning that the committee may have for the bidders would be hard to, quote unquote, contain potentially because it's a live conversation. And there would have to be strict guardrails as to what could be asked, what could be answered, because the responses technically cannot alter the ratings themselves. The ratings are done, put it plainly. This procedure here is for the committee to understand what the ratings process was, what information was provided, how that information was evaluated, what the outcome of those evaluations were. This committee is now being asked, based on the recommendation of the personnel department, to either adopt the recommendation as proposed or not.
Frankly, just for me, as a member of this committee, looking at the work of the RFP committee, for me, there's still a disconnect between the little scoring charts and the final recommendation. You have Blue Shield on the bottom of both of those, and they're the number one recommendation, and I just still haven't kind of made that. That's a dissonance here. I just don't understand.
So I would say for that disconnect, given the fact that the 3-carrier model was recommendation number 1, and Anthem was not willing to be part of that 3-carrier model, we're left with 3 carriers. So by virtue of kind of the constraints and what we're looking at, and again, that long-term strategy, that long-term solution that would want to encourage competition in terms of price, service level, membership experience, but we might be having a different conversation had we had an unbundled option with Anthem.
And I'll also add, I can see where it doesn't maybe easily manifest itself as to why Blue Shield is included. But if we look at more of the plan options to which Blue Shield was included for, the PPO plan is a mere copy of the current PPO plan offered by Anthem. Blue Shield, Anthem are essentially the same carrier in other states. They're different in this state, but that network, that opportunity for the Blue Shield version of the PPO is pretty much identical to the current one. So there's little change there.
Disruption for the PPO members.
The inclusion of the HCHP option for Blue Shield creates an opportunity for members to look at, it is essentially the same network concept, and creates the opportunity for members to look at this HCHP that is a brand new offering that we've never had before at just the lens of the cost difference or the deductible difference that's going to happen. They don't have to think about provider change. They don't have to think about differences in how the plan operates. Just is this deductible difference something against the premium cost difference, something that is the better scenario for me, which we're going to have a lot of education about. And the only other plan that's being offered is the TRIO network, which is the regional replacement, which, to the other point that was discussed prior, is very complementary by providing doctor access that is not provided in the UHC network. So it expands the options for employees. So even though they scored low, for the RFP scoring is over a lot of conditions, a lot of factors, and a lot of areas for differences on how bidders respond, and it's directly on how they respond. But so even though they scored low, it's complementary towards the offering that was identified as being the highest offering, which is UHC and Kaiser.
But really the whole premise is that you're going for the three vendor plan, thinking that the competition for that pool of 9,000 employees would provide overall cost savings and better service.
Not just the 9,000, it'll provide a check and balance too for Kaiser as well. With Kaiser membership growing, having three in the mix, it's changed that, as Steve said, the dynamics of the negotiations, even in renewals going forward. So it's not just the 9,000 that are in the Anthem plan, it's the overall total enrollment and the ability of carriers to position themselves to be most favorable to gain enrollment in terms of premium, service level, and membership experience.
So it's the review committee's preference and a recommendation to go with 3 carriers. It wasn't, we didn't get that instruction, right?
No.
Well, that was the original RFP, was to consider up to 3 carriers, and to consider up to 2 different additional plan models to be added in. I'll be quite frank, the only reason the EPO is not being recommended to be included is because the price points came back quite high, and I think the committee viewed it as adding 1 plan at this point is more than sufficient. Adding the HHP option in venturing into the new world of change that can, over time, change experience, change outcomes, and change where our population is going and how they're seeking services and options that are available.
We rolled out the RFP process thinking we would see competition and see lower premiums, and that did not pan out. So what makes us think that having competition is going to benefit us in any way? With a small pool, if we were talking the whole pool, but we're not. Kaiser people are not going to change, so we're really talking about the 9,000 non-Kaisers.
Well,
and is that really an attractive enough pool of people for these other vendors to really be bidding competitively? And then if you split it in half, really, I mean, what?
But I think the action taken by JLMBC to change the default at a previous committee meeting is going to play into that. So driving price point down and the ability of the non-Kaiser, right now, Kaiser is the lowest cost plan on a broad network and a broad basis. Driving and having that ability to leverage up 2 other carriers to potentially bring that down and having a new, gain membership through that new default based on a regional basis, the lowest cost price point should help kind of shift. I think we looked, there was 4,200 people over, I can't remember what the time period, over 3 years that went into Kaiser and who never made a change at all over a 3-year period of time, grew their membership because they were the default. So the action that the committee took was actually good and kind of speaks to and lends to this concept of competition. And so now taking the further action of having a 3-carrier model will help us leverage that to include the Kaiser population. It'll incentivize Kaiser to want to maintain that lowest cost broad network plan and help control costs at that level as well.
Already 11:30. I could go on and on about this, but I mean, breaking, the monopoly that Kaiser has. When you have Kaiser in all 3 options because they're the only fully integrated staff, whatever model. I mean, let's be realistic. I mean, is it really fully competitive? No. I mean, we didn't, even changing the default is not gonna. They've got more than half of our
And that is definitely a topic that this committee, JLMBC committee, should be considering for future years. How do we address that? In this current offering, there was not an appetite or desire to look at merging the HMO plans together. So the integrated model is the integrated model. And as you see in this response through this RFP, as well as in prior ones, there is not a competition factor there. So that is definitely a topic for consideration for future years. How do we get competition on that side? Or what do we change?
I'm in staff recommendation.
Clear
Which action item?
pieces. for the item.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
to engage in negotiations.
A through D, right? Page one.
And speaking to the,
Starting with option one, to option two, to option three, and return to this body with the results of those negotiations for further deliberation.
There was a second.
Yes.
Thank you all. We will now begin taking votes, starting with the employer organizations, then with management. Shama, your vote.
Aye.
Marlene, your vote.
No.
Jose, your vote.
Repeat the motion.
To instruct staff to begin negotiations in the order of the selection that the review committee has made. Package one, package two, package three. If they're successful, let's stop it. Okay. Come back to this body at the conclusion of the negotiations, whether it's with one with two, with two, with three.
Can I amend the motion to include some time for us to review prior to the meeting? My question in regards to
That is outside the.
that's why I asked.
Well, that's an administrative,
Right.
that's an administrative thing.
Right.
That's. What you're asking employee benefits to do is get the information to you sooner. That would have no bearing on the work that they're doing. That would be procedural, not substantive. Correct?
Correct. So to reiterate, the motion was to adopt 3A, 3B. Subpart A, B, and C as described. Adopts capital C, capital D. Right.
Correct.
There was a second.
and D is in is the instruction report back.
And we have an aye and a no so far.
So let's just take a revote. Thank you.
Can I clarify that? Okay, sorry.
Okay, let's revote.
Does that preclude asking for the oral presentation?
Yes.
Correct. So, well, so then oral presentations are not, you'd want to put that as part of the motion if you want to have them. So that would be added in.
So is that an amendment to the motion?
I still want to hear the redacted information from Al.
And I say that because this committee needs to, it actually would be in lieu of the recommendation. I'm sorry, I misspoke, because this committee needs to hear that before, as part of our process, before a recommendation to move forward is made. So that would be a different action altogether.
The hesitancy I have with oral presentations is that these presentations under the conditions are going to be
There's no
extremely
clarification.
limited.
Right, okay.
I mean, they can come and embellish, but there's no iterative process.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Sorry.
And we can still have, after selection is done, we can still have presentations made separately outside of this process.
The motion previously uttered is on the floor for a vote. So let's do them.
As
Correct.
We are restarting the vote. Shauna, your vote. Marlene, your vote.
Nay.
Jose, your vote.
Yeah.
Lisa, your vote.
No.
Tony, your vote.
yes.
Paul, your vote.
Aye.
Penny, your vote.
Aye.
So then it did not pass.
It's not that. Majority of that labor was not measured.
Quorum is not met. The motion does not pass.
So at this point, the options are we could bring this back at the June 5th meeting. You could make a separate motion to ask for oral presentations. What is there another option?
Or you can.
I think what we need to do is, the neighborhoods, what clarification do you need in order?
Well,
to get this through?
for me, it's difficult because I probably have the majority of the affected members. I probably have the majority of members that are currently enrolled with Anthem. And I've also already heard from some of my members who follow this stuff and read the report. I don't have enough information on what's gonna happen with them, numbers, how you're gonna effectively communicate. Is there gonna be this assistance that you're talking about? Also, kind of on the point that Lisa gave with the percentages, the actual rating numbers. We're going with, and again, it's your recommendation to have 3 providers. I don't think, to my knowledge, the city has never had 3 providers.
No.
So it's kind of this notion that maybe we should try it, but we're going with, number one, a company well, one that didn't score well, and the other that there may be potential issues. And with all the other changes going on in the city right now, including the admin code changes we're talking about, it just seems like a lot for the members, our members, to have to navigate.
So, because the matter was already voted on, I'm not sure if this question is going to potentially a future agenda item for the June 5th meeting. Or whether it's a request, Ms. Fonseca, for bring this matter back June 5th for further discussion. Or is a request for the special meeting that's yet to be.
I don't want to hold up the process, but I also don't want to jump into such a big decision without really, it's a big decision. We were talking about employees' health, preferences.
I don't know how much we can still continue to talk on it, but I think maybe what is difficult to look at in the material that we presented so far is what is the actual level of change that we're asking for. And it's difficult to portray that to a final number because we haven't come down to negotiations. So overall, what we're looking at, though, I know it sounds scary on changing people to plans and people potentially, depending on their choice, having to pay something out of pocket. It is minimal what this proposal is looking at. It is minimal on the number of people that are expected not to be able to see the same doctor that they're currently seeing under the plan offerings that are provided. It's really a level of change that would be unavoidable through changing carriers, but a very small level. What could definitely happen in this process is that we could provide more of that information once we're able to negotiate. We could detail as finely as can. Things change constantly kind of in this overall process to the point of when we actually get towards services starting in January, because contracts with providers change constantly. But we can provide more of that at that time that we're able to get to negotiations and see that final price point of what that looks like. And there's still the option on the table of ultimately, if there is a need to cancel or decision to cancel because it's not in the best interest of the city for whatever the reason is, that is still an outcome, although strongly not recommended outcome.
So now that the motion has not passed, what is the next action item that needs to happen to continue the RFP process?
Is there an item or is it just over?
The meeting will The only item, number 3, now would be for the meeting itself, for item 4. For the special feature agenda. I think that we're further discussing,
But part of the request for future agenda items could be whatever you think is needed to be brought back.
Marlene, are you moved at all by the information that was just provided?
Which information?
What Paul just said in response to your question?
No.
So moving to reconsider is not,
Well, you want me to move to reconsider?
doesn't have to be the losing side.
Yeah.
There are only 2 people at the table.
Voted?
But we voted, but you can, for that motion to reconsider the item again. This committee would revote, reconsider item, and then vote again.
And to be clear, the decision is not to select that. The decision is to engage in negotiations to see if they can move the needle favorably to the criteria that the review committee has deemed would be worthy of selection. They come back to this body with that information, with the results of those negotiations, and you can still say no to that. What you just did is you just said no to the negotiation process. I want to be clear about that, correct?
As explained, yes.
As moved.
Yeah.
Maybe they can come back with some of the answers they're looking for, with specific questions you have. And this clarification.
Yeah, and if we bring this item back, we're in the same spot we're in and have been for the last 2 hours and 42 minutes. Same spot with no new information at all.
But there were 3 options, 3 packages.
Right.
4 vendors. But the recommendation was only to talk to 3 of the vendors, not 4.
First, we engaged the top 3 vendors in package 1 first to see what the results of those discussions are. Then it moves to the second if
They're not successful,
negotiations-
but we don't even know what success means.
Well, you, look, I entrust the review committee that I and my management colleagues appointed. And your colleague is on the review committee. She's been a part of this, part and parcel. So, I mean, these are the people that we selected to go through this process. And I know my review committee member very well and fully trust his judgment. And I trust Labor's representative's judgment as well. I don't know her. I don't know you as well as I do Mr. Griffin, but I know enough about Sean to trust her judgment in the review process. This is the recommendation they made to us. And again, we're not adopting their recommendation today. We're simply giving the professionals the latitude to have further discussions. This is an open session. If the vendors were smart, they'd be listening with the concerns we have. And those concerns are going to be expressed and explored through negotiation.
You just said that we didn't recommend, but we did just approve the recommendation. You moved B.
To move
B.
further in the process, to move further in the process. Is that not correct?
B and C together. Yes,
B and C together.
B and C together.
Negotiate. If they come back with a recommendation, if you don't agree with it, you can reject it.
And if at that point we reject it, then it goes down to recommendation 2, and you can go. You've already negotiated with them.
So it's hard to predict what we're going to be able to do and what we're going to come back with. No. I'm trying to make a point without being too expected of what you're going to see. Whatever we come back with as this final outcome of negotiations, at that point, there is still the option to be able to cancel the RFP. That is always an option to exercise. So it is not the recommended. We definitely do not want to go to that. But that would be as outlined before, as always an option on the table to continue the current services.
There's no present inclination to move to reopen. I think that's what we brought back as well.
You know, when Paul verbally made his motion, it made sense to me. But when you read it out as being what's written here, I find this, to me, the action items as written are instructing us to move forward with option one. But what I heard Paul saying was, go to the table, go negotiate, get us the best deal, which is a bit, is less specific than.
So like, maybe for personnel, again, for the June 5th meeting, maybe personnel could look at the language.
I think we'll have to speak with legal on the language because it is copying, the current language in the recommendation is copying from the RFP specifics. So we could try to come up with an alternative language motion that meets that with that's still in compliance with the RFP. Can't craft that right now, but we could make that attempt for June 5th.
And that question, if the language we have here, it's an motion, it's possible to modify that language with an amendment?
There's some, unfortunately, there's some limits on what that amendment would be because we're constrained by the RFP process itself.
Or some clarification and clarifying, amendments, so yes, yeah, saying that.
I don't know if that language is, can be understood at the table, whether that language can be properly explained and within. We would have to go back.
I don't, maybe I'm so far down the rabbit hole that I'm not even sure I'm saying. But all I did was reverse the order of what is written on the page. It says clearly here, pending successful negotiations by the personnel department with Blue Shield for, at minimum, contract requirements, price premiums, and service level agreements, except at pending negotiations.
Okay.
So the action is, we accept the recommendations pending the outcome of further negotiations with the vendors in the order that the review committee has identified. So all I did was I reversed the order of the words, but reversing the order does not change the substance of the motion or the words on this page. I'm saying the same thing that's on this page.
Yeah, but I mean, I would just say at very high level that I in no way would recommend option one. And so by voting to approve the recommendation by the committee, am I saying that I recommend option one?
But you're not. You're saying that you recommend that the personnel department see if they can make it more palatable to you. Right now, it's not palatable to you based on everything you've read. That's what negotiations are for. You go in, you say, this is what the committee discussed. These are the items that are of concern. This is where they found fault with your presentation. This is what they liked about your presentation. This is what you liked about other presentations and so on and so forth. What do you have to say for yourself? Oh, mea culpa. We'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this, and change that. The results of that, then they run that through the filter of the review committee. The review committee says, that's what we were looking for. And the review committee, look, John is here, Errol's listening. The review committee is taking this stuff in. Okay? And they're going to evaluate the results of the negotiations through their lens of how they reviewed this and whether or not that meets better the criteria they set forth. Comes back for a second bite of the apple. This is not the day. We're not signing on the dotted line. Comes back for a second bite of the apple. They come back with the
I move to
results.
reconsider.
Thank you. I second.
We have a vote.
I think we will restart the vote, beginning with employee organizations, then with management again.
Are we taking a vote to
Reconsider.
This is only to reconsider.
Only to reconsider.
Vote to reconsider.
Wait, now we have to move it again.
Yeah.
It's across the wall.
Okay, this is the move to reconsider the vote. Okay, Shauna, your vote. Marlene, your vote.
Aye.
Jose, your vote.
Aye.
Lisa, your vote.
Aye.
Tony, your vote.
Aye.
Paul, your vote.
Aye.
Petty, your vote.
Aye.
The vote is unanimous. The motion passes.
So is there a motion to revisit item number 3?
So move.
We have a second?
Second.
Let's vote on that.
Shauna, your vote.
To be clear, it's to approve.
No, it's just to reconsider again. That portion, that little.
Okay.
Okay.
Wait, what? It's to reconsider.
You-
It's the actual motion now, right?
It's the motion to bring item 3 back to the table. Not to vote on 3 itself, but just to bring the item back.
Just get to bring the call.
We ought to reconsider.
Yeah.
Now we're putting back on the agenda.
We're just now bringing the body out of the call.
It will be reanimated, that's the point.
There you go. That's what we're trying to get at.
Okay, we are retaking the vote. I'm sorry. We are taking the vote on the
The vote is to bring item 3 back to the table.
Shauna, your vote.
Aye.
Marlene, your vote.
Aye.
Jose, your vote.
Aye.
Lisa, your vote.
Aye.
Tony, your vote.
Aye.
Paul, your vote.
Aye.
Petty, your vote.
Aye.
The votes are unanimous. The recommendation passes.
So now item 3 is back on the table. So
I will-
for motion, for the questions,
Any questions? I'll reintroduce my motion that was previously ordered down.
Second.
for the record, sorry. The motion is for item number 3 to accept item capital A, item capital B, within the reverse order of recommending to the general manager of the personnel department and that United Healthcare be selected as the provider of the United Healthcare Harmony HMO, United Healthcare Select Value HMO plans for a 2-year contract beginning January 1st, 2026 to December 31st, 2027, with an option for up to 3 additional 1-year terms pending successful negotiation by the personnel department with United Healthcare for at minimum contract requirements, prices, premiums, and service level requirements, and repeating the same for B and A. And then, and we're approving the recommendations to receive and note sub-item capital C of item 3 and sub-item capital D of item. So that's the motion, right?
Yes.
We have the second.
Okay, we will begin the vote again. Shauna, your vote.
Aye.
Marlene, your vote.
My vote remains nay.
Jose, your vote.
Is this the same motion for?
Yeah.
Same motion,
The reverse order?
same motion. Things when you said.
Understood. How the information with the reverse order from what I'm reading here is recommendation number 1. We spent time talking about recommendation number 1 as giving them order and instruction to negotiate, but now we're going into the reverse order number C, which has United Healthcare HMO, United,
Pending successful negotiations by the personnel department with United Healthcare.
and that's in reverse order based on all the information we received today.
It's still package 1, 2, and 3 are unchanged. Just to clarify. So package 1 is still the 3 providers as package 1. Package 2 is the 2 providers guys are in UHC. So that
But the reverse order of A, B, and C, what's the reason for that?
B is still package 1. So I think the reverse order is the concept, and it just I think I'm clarifying this right. Is the concept of focusing on the negotiation aspect more so than anything else.
Because.
But the language is still
contract
language.
At this point has not been awarded.
Correct.
What we're doing is negotiations. We're
Correct.
not recommending that if this is negotiation, we're not approving a contract, we're approving a negotiation.
Correct.
That's the only activity you approve.
the results of which will be brought back to you for further deliberation.
And it will still be a pre-award at that stage too.
Thank you for clarification. Yeah.
Lisa, your vote?
Aye.
Tony, your vote?
Aye.
Paul, your vote?
Aye.
Hetty, your vote?
Aye.
The motion passes. Okay, thank you all. Moving on to item 4.
Do we have any requests for future agenda items?
Is this the point at which we can ask for the oral presentation?
Separate from the selection process, yes.
Yep.
And if there's any other items that you want staff to consider and bring back, can select them as well or recommend them.
Okay, so our next regular meeting is June 5th. It is 11:57.
It's one of those ones where, yeah,